February 1, 1991, started peacefully in Holiday, Utah, a quiet suburb where snow lingered on the lawns. It seemed like a typical, uneventful morning. Lucille Johnson, a 65-year-old widow, is at home. Her neighbors knew her as a kind and reliable woman. She has a regular routine, waking up early, keeping her house tidy, and enjoying meeting familiar people. The first sign that something was wrong was when Lucille didn't answer her phone. Then, she missed an activity she had planned. By evening, her family was very worried and came to her house. Everything inside seemed normal. There were no signs of a break-in. However, they found Lucille Johnson dead in one of the rooms. The autopsy revealed she was beaten with a blunt object and then suffocated with a pillow. The house wasn't ransacked. Her purse and jewelry were still there. This indicated it wasn't a robbery. Investigators noticed the lack of disorder, suggesting the person inside knew how to be quiet and careful. Some details of the scene didn't make sense. Lego toys were scattered on the floor, not broken or hidden, but simply there. The investigation file stated these Legos didn't belong to Lucille Johnson, nor did she have young children living with her. These toys would later become a crucial and disturbing piece of evidence. Although their significance wasn't clear in 1991, initial investigators used the methods available at the time. They photographed the scene, collected fingerprints, and gathered trace evidence. They also interviewed neighbors, but no one reported hearing screams or seeing anyone leaving. The timeline suggested the murder happened during the day, implying the killer wasn't afraid of being seen or believed they wouldn't be noticed. Lucille Johnson was known to be cautious and didn't have any known enemies or troubled relationships. Relatives said she was trusting, and this trust might have been how the killer gained access to her after the body was removed and the house was secured. Investigators were left with a question that would remain unanswered for many years. How can a woman vanish without a trace within her own life? To understand the violent act that occurred in Lucille Johnson's home, investigators needed to first understand the life she lived before her death. Lucille was not isolated. Family and community records show she was an integral part of the Holiday community. She was a longtime resident, a regular church attendee, and a caring neighbor who remembered birthdays and inquired about children. She had been widowed years earlier. Loss had shaped her, but it had not isolated her. Friends described her as independent, orderly, and generous with her time. She volunteered, she maintained routines that rarely shifted. She preferred daylight errands, kept her doors locked at night. But during the day, she was known to answer a knock without hesitation. According to investigators, there was no indication she feared anyone. Lucille's home was clean, comfortable, and simple, mirroring her personality. There were no obvious secrets. A review of her financial records showed no strange transactions, money disputes, or legal issues. Her phone records showed regular contact with family and friends, with nothing unusual. Her life appeared to be stable and without hidden problems or reckless behavior. Lucille's normal life made the investigation difficult for detectives. When they looked into her relationships, they found no clear suspect. She had no angry ex-partner, no history of domestic abuse, and no reported issues with her neighbors. The lack of any apparent reason for the crime made it hard to develop initial theories. Usually, violent crimes have warning signs, but in Lucille's case, there were none. Detectives also thought about whether Lucille knew her attacker slightly, someone she'd let into her home. This could have been a service worker, a visitor, or someone connected through family or the community. However, she had no scheduled appointments, repair calls, or expected deliveries that day. Her family struggled with the same question. They spoke of her kindness, but also of her boundaries. She was careful, they said. She would not invite a stranger in. Yet the crime scene suggested familiarity, no forced entry, no struggle that spilled through the house. According to forensic analysis, the attack occurred in a confined area, quickly, decisively. This contradiction defined the case. Lucille Johnson lived a life designed to be safe, predictable, quiet. And yet, violence reached her without warning. As detectives turned back to the crime scene photos, one detail kept resurfacing. The Legos. Bright, plastic shapes in a home untouched by children, evidence that did not belong to her life, but now, impossibly, belonged to her death. They would need to understand how those pieces arrived there. And who brought them? When detectives returned to Lucille's home in the days after her death, the house no longer felt simply quiet. It felt staged by absence. According to crime scene photographs and police reports, everything appeared largely undisturbed. Furniture remained in place. Drawers were closed. There was no sign of forced entry. The lack of visible chaos suggested control. This was not an impulsive act that spiraled. It was contained. Lucille's injuries told a different story. The autopsy documented blunt force trauma to her head, followed by suffocation. Investigators concluded she was alive during the attack. The violence was personal, close, yet there were no defensive wounds that indicated a prolonged struggle. According to forensic analysis, the attack likely unfolded quickly, catching her by surprise. Then there were the Legos. Scattered across the floor in multiple rooms, they stood out immediately, brightly colored plastic against a muted, adult home. Investigators photographed them carefully, unsure of their relevance, but unwilling to ignore them. According to the case file, Lucille did not own Lego toys. No grandchildren lived with her. Family members confirmed the pieces were unfamiliar. In 1991, the Legos were catalogued as potential trace evidence. They were checked for fingerprints. Several partial prints were lifted, though at the time, no match could be made. DNA technology was limited. Biological material was preserved, but its future value was uncertain. Investigators could not yet hear what the evidence was trying to say. Police theorized that a child might have been present, or that someone who had recently been around children brought the toys unintentionally, stuck to shoes or clothing. The idea was unsettling. It implied the crime may not have been entirely solitary, but without corroboration, it remained speculative. The absence of theft narrowed motive. This was not financially driven. There was no abuse documented in the autopsy report. According to detectives, the crime appeared motivated by opportunity rather than escalation. Witness canvassing yielded little. Neighbors reported nothing unusual. No unfamiliar vehicles. No raised voices. The crime occurred in daylight, yet passed unnoticed. That fact alone reshaped the investigation. Whoever committed the murder understood the environment, or believed they could disappear within it. As days turned to weeks, leads thinned. The Legos were boxed and stored. Fingerprints were logged into databases that would not yet answer back. By the end of 1991, the investigation into Lucille Johnson's murder had begun to stall. Detectives had exhausted immediate leads. Interviews circled back on themselves. According to police records, no suspect could be placed at the scene. No eyewitnesses came forward. No confession surfaced. The case did not collapse all at once. It thinned, quietly, lead by lead. Lucille's family lived in a state of suspended grief. They buried her without answers. Birthdays passed. Holidays arrived without her presence. According to relatives, the uncertainty was as painful as the loss itself. No narrative to hold onto, just an open wound. Inside the police department, the case file grew heavier, but no clearer. Physical evidence remained preserved. Fingerprints lifted from the Lego pieces, trace material collected from Lucille's body, fibers bagged and sealed. But technology lagged behind intent. DNA analysis, still in its early forensic stages, could not yet extract a usable profile. Fingerprint databases were limited and fragmented across jurisdictions. According to investigators, the evidence was strong but mute. As time passed, the case was marked as cold. It wasn't forgotten, but it was no longer actively investigated. Detectives were reassigned, and new cases took priority. The Legos remained in evidence, their importance still unknown. Lucille Johnson's case was filed away with other unsolved cases. The neighborhood around her home changed. New families moved in. Children grew up unaware of what had happened there. According to law enforcement interviews years later, cold cases often survive only because someone refuses to let go. In this case, that someone was not just the family, but a system slowly evolving. In the early 2000s, forensic science advanced rapidly. DNA databases expanded. Cold case units emerged with renewed purpose. Old evidence gained new potential. According to the investigation file, Lucille's case was periodically reviewed, but each time it returned to storage. No new matches, no fresh leads. Then, in 2013, something changed. A decision was made to reopen the case fully, not because of a new witness, not because of a confession, but because technology had finally caught up to what the evidence had been holding for more than 20 years. The Legos were removed from storage. In 2013, more than 22 years after Lucille Johnson was killed, detectives reopened her case with a different mindset. This time, they were not looking for new witnesses. They were looking backward, at evidence collected long before its value could be fully understood. According to law enforcement records, advances in forensic science had transformed what was once speculative into something measurable. The Legos were among the first items re-examined. Using modern techniques, investigators tested biological material preserved on the plastic surfaces. According to the forensic lab reports, DNA was successfully extracted. It was a partial profile, but viable. At the same time, fingerprints lifted from the Lego pieces were reprocessed through updated national databases. Systems that did not exist in 1991 were now interconnected, capable of reaching across state lines. Another crucial detail resurfaced. Beneath Lucille Johnson's fingernails, technicians in 1991 had preserved trace material. At the time, it could not be analyzed conclusively. In 2013, that material produced DNA consistent with the profile recovered from the Legos. According to investigators, this indicated direct physical contact between Lucille and her attacker. When the DNA profile was entered into CODIS, the National DNA Database, it did not immediately return a match, but investigators persisted. According to case documents, a fingerprint hit came first. The print did not belong to an adult offender. It belonged to a child. Records identified the fingerprints as belonging to a young boy who had been fingerprinted years earlier for a non-criminal reason. According to investigators, the child's identity led them to his father, John Sansing. Sansing was not a local suspect. He was not even in Utah. He was on death row in Arizona. Sansing had been convicted of a separate murder committed in 1998. According to court records, his DNA was already in the system. When detectives compared that DNA to the profile recovered from Lucille Johnson's case, the match was confirmed. The same man. Two different victims, 7 years apart. Investigators concluded that Sansing had been in Utah in 1991. His son, then 5 years old, had been with him. The Legos likely belonged to the child. According to the investigation file, the presence of the toys was no longer mysterious. It was devastatingly clear. Once John Sansing's name surfaced, the case of Lucille Johnson shifted from uncertainty to confrontation. Investigators now had a suspect anchored, not by rumor, but by forensic fact, According to court records and police interviews, Sansing was already one of Arizona's most notorious inmates, convicted in 1998 for the murder of Pastor Michael McGrath and sentenced to death. His history was documented, his capacity for violence established. Detectives reconstructed Sansing's movements in early 1991. According to the investigation file, he had ties to Utah at the time. Employment records, family connections, and travel patterns placed him in the state during the period when Lucille Johnson was killed. This was not circumstantial drift. It was geographic alignment. The presence of his young son at the crime scene became one of the most disturbing elements of the case. Investigators determined that the Lego toys scattered throughout Lucille's home likely belonged to the child. Fingerprints confirmed it. According to police, this detail suggested Sansing may have entered the house under the guise of normalcy. A man with a child does not immediately register as a threat. It may have lowered Lucille's guard. Sansing's psychological profile, drawn from Arizona court evaluations, revealed a history of impulsive violence, substance abuse, and antisocial behavior. According to expert testimony in his earlier trial, he struggled with control and exhibited a pattern of escalating aggression. There was no known personal connection between Sansing and Lucille Johnson. This was not revenge. It was not domestic. Investigators concluded the motive was opportunistic. When confronted with the evidence years later, Sansing did not confess. According to prosecutors, he offered no explanation for how his DNA and his child's fingerprints ended up at the scene. He did not deny being in Utah. He did not provide an alternative narrative. Silence became his strategy. For Lucille's family, the revelation brought a complex form of relief. After decades of not knowing, the truth had a name. But it was not a name they recognized. According to family statements, this made the crime feel both resolved and senseless. A life ended by a stranger. No warning, no reason. The investigation now moved toward accountability. Utah authorities prepared to bring charges against a man already condemned in another state. The question was no longer who killed Lucille Johnson. It was whether justice, delayed by decades, could still be delivered. In 2014, more than 2 decades after Lucille Johnson was killed, prosecutors in Utah formally charged John Sansing with her murder. According to court documents, the case rested almost entirely on forensic evidence. There were no eyewitnesses, no confession. What remained was science, preserved patiently across time. Sansing was already incarcerated in Arizona, awaiting execution for another murder. Extradition was not immediate. Legal coordination between states slowed the process. According to prosecutors, the challenge was not proving guilt, but navigating a system never designed to move quickly when the suspect was already sentenced to die elsewhere. When Utah authorities presented their case, the narrative was stark. DNA recovered from beneath Lucille Johnson's fingernails matched Sansing's profile. Fingerprints belonging to his young son were found on Lego toys scattered throughout the home. According to forensic experts, the probability of this evidence belonging to anyone else was infinitesimally small. The science was unambiguous. The defense did not offer an alternative suspect. There was no claim of contamination. According to court filings, Sansing's attorneys focused on procedural arguments and the passage of time. Memories fade, evidence degrades. But the physical evidence had endured. Properly stored, properly documented, its integrity held. Lucille's family attended hearings when they could. For them, the courtroom was not about vengeance. According to family statements, it was about acknowledgement, about having the system finally say her name out loud, about confirming that what happened to her mattered. Sansing never testified. He did not address the court. According to prosecutors, his silence mirrored the absence he left behind in every victim's life he touched. The case did not culminate in a dramatic trial. In 2015, Sansing pleaded guilty to Lucille Johnson's murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, to be served consecutively with his existing sentence. For the Johnson family, justice arrived without celebration. According to relatives, it closed one chapter but did not restore what was taken. Lucille was still gone. Time had still passed, but the truth was no longer hidden, and that truth would echo beyond one courtroom. When the case of Lucille Johnson finally closed, it did so without spectacle. There were no cameras crowding the courthouse steps, no public statements from the man who killed her. According to family members, the ending felt quieter than the crime itself, but its impact carried weight. Lucille's relatives spoke of relief, tempered by sorrow. For more than 20 years, they had lived without answers. According to their statements, knowing who was responsible did not soften the loss, but it ended the questions that followed them into every gathering, every anniversary. Justice, they said, arrived late, but it arrived intact. For law enforcement, the case became a reference point, a reminder that evidence, when preserved correctly, can outlive limitations. According to investigators involved in the reopening, Lucille Johnson's murder reinforced the importance of meticulous crime scene processing. In 1991, detectives could not have known how critical the Legos would become. Yet, they collected them, logged them, stored them. That discipline made the future possible. The case also underscored the value of revisiting the forgotten. Cold case units across the country have cited similar investigations as proof that time does not weaken truth. Technology evolves, databases expand, connections emerge. According to forensic experts, many unsolved cases now rest not on missing evidence, but on waiting science. There was another lesson, quieter and more unsettling. Violence does not always announce itself. Lucille Johnson lived carefully. She trusted her community. Her death was not the result of recklessness or risk. It was random. According to criminologists, this randomness is what makes such crimes deeply destabilizing. They challenge assumptions about safety and familiarity. Yet within that randomness, accountability still mattered. John Sansing remains incarcerated, serving sentences for multiple murders. Lucille Johnson's name is now part of the official record of his crimes. She is no longer an anonymous victim in an unsolved file. She is acknowledged, documented, remembered. In the end, the case leaves a lasting question for those who study it. How many voices remain unheard? Not because they were lost, but because the moment to listen has not yet arrived. Lucille Johnson waited more than 2 decades, and when the system finally listened, the truth answered. It was March the 25th, 2022 in Mayfield, a quiet suburb of Newcastle, Australia. 21-year-old McKenzie Anderson, known as Max to her friends, was at home in her modest apartment on Crebet Street. She was a young mother, her life revolving around her 23-month-old son. Around 10:40 p.m., a frantic call reached the local police. A neighbor, startled by screams, reported a disturbance at McKenzie's apartment. The police rushed to the scene. When they arrived at the Mayfield Street apartment, they found a horrific scene. McKenzie was born and raised in Newcastle, New South Wales, in a close-knit family. Her mother, Tabitha Ackret, a dental hygienist, was a pillar of support. Their bond was evident in the heartfelt tributes Tabitha later shared. McKenzie was also close to her stepfather and friends, who described her as the heart of their circle. She had a knack for making people laugh, often sharing snippets of her life on social media, where her TikTok videos captured her humor and strength as a young mother. Her son was her world, and she poured her energy into creating a stable life for him despite the hardships she faced. McKenzie's life hadn't been easy. By her early 20s, she was navigating the challenges of single motherhood while living in a modest unit on Crebet Street. Friends said she was determined to break free from a cycle of hardship, working to provide for her son and dreaming of a brighter future. Her relationship with Tyrone Thompson, her ex-partner, cast a long shadow over her life. The two began dating in late 2019, and their off-again relationship was marked by turbulence. By October 2021, Thompson had been jailed for assaulting McKenzie, intimidating her, and damaging her property. An apprehended violence order was in place, meant to keep Thompson away from McKenzie, prohibiting any contact or visits to her home. He served a short sentence with a non-parole period of just over 4 months and was released on March 9, 2022. McKenzie's friends later revealed McKenzie lived in constant fear, convinced Thompson would come after her once he was free. Then, she messaged a friend, saying that Tyrone had just gotten out of jail and was still being weird, harassing her. Despite the AVO, Thompson reached out to McKenzie almost immediately after his release, calling her and sending messages from multiple social media accounts. One heartbreaking detail emerged later. McKenzie had ordered for a new set of knives for Christmas 2021, a practical gift for her home. Those same knives would later become part of the tragedy. The night of March 25, 2022, started like any other in the quiet suburb of Mayfield, but beneath the surface of this ordinary night, a tragedy was unfolding. McKenzie's apartment on Mayfield was a small, unassuming unit in a block of flats, the kind of place where neighbors knew each other by sight, even by name. That evening, she wasn't alone. A male friend, whose identity was closely guarded in early reports, was with her, along with her 23-month-old son, who was likely asleep in his crib. Tyrone Thompson, her ex-partner, was also present at some point during the night, despite the apprehended violence order that barred him from contacting her or visiting her home. The details of how Thompson ended up at her apartment remain murky, but court records later revealed that he had been asked to leave multiple times that evening. His refusal to comply set the stage for what would become a devastating confrontation. In panic, a neighbor dialed emergency services, describing a scene that sounded dire. A woman's voice in distress, a man's voice shouting, and the unmistakable sense that something was terribly wrong. The urgency was clear enough to prompt an immediate response from the Newcastle City Police District. When police arrived at the apartment block, they were met with a harrowing sight. McKenzie lay lifeless on the veranda outside her unit, her body surrounded by blood. The scene was chaotic, with paramedics soon joining the officers in a frantic attempt to save her. Despite their best efforts, McKenzie was pronounced dead at the scene. Her injuries were too severe to overcome. Her toddler son, found inside the apartment, was mercifully unharmed. Police found a man at the scene, later identified as Tyrone Thompson, sitting cross-legged at the top of the communal stairs, his hand bloodied and injured. He was loud and demanding medical attention for his wound. A broken knife handle and blade were found near McKenzie, stark evidence of the brutality that had unfolded. Thompson was arrested and taken to hospital under police guard for treatment of his injury. The tragedy was the culmination of events that had been building for weeks. After his release from prison on March 9, 2022, Thompson immediately breached the apprehended violence order. He began contacting McKenzie, calling her, messaging her from multiple social media accounts, and even reaching out to people close to her new partner. Court documents later revealed that McKenzie had spent much of the previous 6 days with Thompson. Despite her fear of him, friends said she felt trapped, unsure how to break free from his persistent attempts to reconnect. That night, Thompson and a male friend were among those gathered at her apartment. Though the exact dynamics remain unclear, tensions escalated. The male friend, who had left earlier in the evening, returned to check on her, only to witness a horrific scene. Thompson standing over McKenzie, who was already on the ground. Investigators later learned that McKenzie had been trying to protect herself in the days leading up to that night. She had reached out to domestic violence advocacy groups, emailing them to request help with security measures like cameras and reinforced doors. The night of March 25, wasn't a sudden explosion of violence, but the culmination of a pattern of control and intimidation. Yet, the system allowed him back into her life just 16 days before her death. The AVO, meant to be her shield, was little more than a piece of paper. The Newcastle City Police District launched a meticulous investigation to uncover what had happened in those chaotic final moments. The investigation began at the crime scene itself. Detectives meticulously combed through McKenzie's apartment, cataloging every detail. The veranda where her body was found was a focal point, marked by bloodstains and the shattered remnants of a knife. Forensic teams collected the fragments, knowing they could hold critical clues about the weapon and its wielder. Inside the apartment, officers found signs of a disturbance: overturned furniture, scattered belongings, and traces of blood that hinted at a confrontation that had moved from inside to the veranda. Digital evidence also became a cornerstone of the investigation. McKenzie's phone and social media accounts revealed a trail of fear and desperation. Investigators found messages between McKenzie and Thompson showing they had been in contact since his release. Some exchanges were tense, others oddly amicable, suggesting a complex dynamic. Thompson had also messaged people close to McKenzie's new partner, attempting to gather information or assert control. These communications, pulled from servers and cross-referenced with phone records, showed he had breached the AVO multiple times. Detectives also explored McKenzie's broader relationships. They interviewed her mother, Tabitha, who shared her daughter's fears about Thompson. In a statement to the court, later reported by the Newcastle Herald, Tabitha said, "McKenzie lived in constant fear after Thompson's release." McKenzie told Tabitha he wouldn't let her go. Friends echoed this, describing how McKenzie had confided in them about Thompson's persistent attempts to reconnect. One friend told police she wanted to protect her son but felt trapped, like there was no way out. During police questioning, Thompson's statements were guarded but revealing. According to court reports, later cited by the Newcastle Herald, he claimed the incident was a chaotic misunderstanding. He admitted to being at McKenzie's apartment that night, despite the AVO, but insisted he had been invited. He described an argument that escalated, alleging that McKenzie had been the aggressor, wielding a knife in a heated moment. His account painted a picture of self-defense, claiming his hand injury came from trying to disarm her. Though his story shifted under scrutiny, with inconsistencies about the sequence of events, he denied any intent to harm her. However, his explanation struggled to align with the physical evidence: the broken knife, McKenzie's fatal injuries, and witness accounts of her desperation to escape. Detectives pressed Thompson about his actions in the days leading up to the incident, confronting him with evidence of his repeated AVO breaches, including messages and calls to McKenzie and her associate. Thompson downplayed these breaches, claiming he was trying to sort things out and maintain a connection for the sake of their shared history. As Thompson remained in custody, the investigation continued to solidify the case. Forensic reports confirmed McKenzie's blood on the knife and Thompson's DNA on the handle, strengthening the link to the crime. The autopsy of McKenzie Anderson revealed she suffered 78 stab wounds inflicted in less than 3 minutes. On March 27, 2022, Thompson was formally charged with murder, breaching an AVO, and related offenses stemming from the events of that night. The murder charge was anchored by compelling evidence: knife fragments bearing McKenzie's blood, witness accounts of her screams, and Thompson's presence at the scene with a suspicious injury. Additional charges included intimidating behavior, reflecting his pattern of harassment in the weeks prior. The motive, while not explicitly stated by Thompson, emerged through the investigation's findings. Detectives and domestic violence experts consulted concluded Thompson's actions stemmed from a need to regain control of McKenzie, who was trying to move on with her life and protect her son. The presence of McKenzie's male friend that night may have been a catalyst, intensifying Thompson's fixation. The charges against Thompson were a step toward justice. They also highlighted the failures that allowed him to remain a threat. By early 2025, the case had reached a critical juncture in the Newcastle Supreme Court, where the pursuit of justice for the 21-year-old mother unfolded. Initially set for a 4-week trial starting April 7, 2025, the case took a dramatic turn when Tyrone Thompson, then 25, changed his plea on April 1, 2025, in the New South Wales Supreme Court. He pleaded guilty to the domestic violence murder of McKenzie Anderson, halting the need for a full trial. This plea came after years of denials, during which he had maintained his innocence even as evidence mounted against him. The guilty plea was a significant moment, sparing McKenzie's family the pain of a protracted trial, but shifting the focus to the sentencing hearing, where the court would determine the consequences of his actions. The hearing, presided over by Justice Richard Weinstein, became a pivotal moment for all involved. The prosecution, led by Crown Prosecutor Brendan Queenan, presented a harrowing case. They argued that Thompson's actions on March 25, 2022, were a brutal culmination of a pattern of control and violence. Court documents detailed how Thompson, on parole for prior domestic violence offenses against McKenzie, ignored an apprehended violence order and broke into her Mayfield apartment twice that night. Using 2 kitchen knives, he stabbed her 78 times in less than 3 minutes, an attack so ferocious that one knife snapped. The prosecution emphasized McKenzie's vulnerability, noting her repeated attempts to seek safety through advocacy groups and her fear that Thompson would harm her after his release. The defense, representing Thompson, acknowledged the gravity of his actions, but sought leniency by highlighting mitigating factors. They argued that Thompson's mental health issues and challenging background diminished his moral culpability. His legal team submitted that he was not psychotic at the time of the crime, but struggled with emotional instability, which contributed to the escalation. Then, an apology letter from Thompson was tendered, in which he expressed regret, stating, "No words can undo the pain and devastation he caused to someone he genuinely loved." However, the prosecution challenged this, with Queenan noting there is some element of victim blaming. Justice Weinstein, wary of the letter's sincerity, remarked that it offered limited insight into true remorse. On May 1, 2025, Justice Weinstein delivered the sentence. Thompson was jailed for a maximum of 22 years 6 months, with a non-parole period of 15 years 6 months, making him eligible for parole in 2038. The judge described the attack as a frenzied act of such ferocity that it left McKenzie's family shattered. Noting their helplessness, despair, and anger, he acknowledged the aggravating factors, including Thompson's prior violence and McKenzie's fear, but also considered his guilty plea and personal circumstances when setting the term. The sentence sparked immediate outrage from McKenzie's family, particularly her mother, Tabitha Ackett. Outside the Newcastle Supreme Court, she collapsed in tears, telling reporters that whilst it might be thought of as a good outcome for the courts, they were disgusted that that sentence was what they thought the value of her daughter's life was worth. She called the sentence an insult to women globally and demanded an appeal. On May 14, 2025, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions announced it would appeal Thompson's sentence, arguing that it was manifestly inadequate given the severity of the crime. Tabitha welcomed the decision, stating, "This is the first hurdle to getting a sentence that is more in line with community and moral standards." The appeal, set for a 2-hour hearing in the Court of Criminal Appeal on August 8, 2025, aims to increase Thompson's jail time. Prosecutors are citing the need to set a stronger precedent against domestic violence offenders. The case's current status leaves Thompson in prison, awaiting the appeal's outcome. While McKenzie's family continues their advocacy, the appeal could reshape the sentence, but no verdict can undo the loss. For McKenzie's son, now in the care of relatives and her loved ones, the fight is as much about honoring her memory as it is about ensuring others don't suffer the same fate. The question lingers: will the legal system deliver a punishment that reflects the true cost of McKenzie's life, or will it fall short again? One ordinary afternoon on a deserted Queensland beach, a young woman walks her dog and never returns. The next morning, her father discovers her body partially buried in the sand, naked, with clear signs of a struggle to the death. No witnesses, no cameras, no cries for help, just a dog tied to a tree and a car still sitting quietly at the beach entrance. From there, Australia is drawn into a thrilling, years-long case, with the suspect fleeing to the other side of the world, ambiguous confessions, and a series of secrets from the victim's personal life gradually revealed who killed Toya Cordingly and why. In today's video, we take a look at the entire story of the Toya Cordingly case. We will start from the last moment she was alive, then go through the investigation, the search for the killer, and finally, the unsolved mysteries after more than 6 years. This is a heartbreaking story about searching for the truth. Toya Cordingly, born in 1994, grew up in Cairns, a city in northeastern Australia, with her parents, Troy and Vanessa. From a young age, she showed great compassion for people and animals. Toya attended local schools, completed a pharmaceutical program, and worked in a pharmacy. Despite her busy schedule, she always made time for animals. She volunteered at the Paws and Claws Animal Shelter, providing care, walking dogs, and cleaning. Her colleagues remember her dedication. She never missed a shift and often returned to check on sick animals. Toya's love for animals extended beyond volunteering. She advocated for their protection, promoted spaying and neutering, condemned cruelty, and encouraged shelter adoptions. At the time, Toya was in a relationship with Marco Heidenreich, with whom she lived. They spend weekends together, go on picnics, and share photos on social media. However, some of Toya's friends revealed that she had expressed doubts about the relationship and was considering breaking up. On October 21, 2018, 24 years old, Toya went to Wangeti Beach, a remote beach between Cairns and Port Douglas in Queensland, Australia. She was taking care of India, her boyfriend's dog. As the sun set, Toya arrived at the beach, parked her dark-colored Mitsubishi Lancer, leashed India, and began walking along the sand. No one directly witnessed her walk, but her presence was confirmed by phone tracking data and evidence found at the scene. The next morning, Toya's car was still parked at the beach entrance, indicating something was wrong. India was found tied to a tree near the parking area. India was unharmed, but the situation was concerning. Toya's wallet was inside the car, but her phone was missing. When Toya didn't return home or respond to calls or messages, her loved ones became worried. Her mother and friends spent the night trying to contact her without success. On the morning of the 22nd of October, they went to Wangeti Beach and realized Toya hadn't simply wandered off. The abandoned car, the tied-up dog, and the lack of contact indicated a serious problem. Wangeti Beach is a remote, unlit area with few nearby homes. These conditions made nighttime search difficult. By the morning of the 22nd of October, dozens of people had gathered at the beach. Toya's family, friends, and community members organized a search effort, combing through the beach, dunes, trails, and brush. A sense of urgency and dread filled the air. Everyone sensed this wasn't a simple case of someone getting lost. Toya's father, Troy Cordingly, joined the search team early that morning. He separated from the group and walked towards the area where the sand met the scrubland. There, he noticed disturbed sand. Kneeling down, he brushed the sand away and uncovered the body of a young woman, his daughter, Toya. Her body was lying on its side, partially buried, and she was not clothed. Her personal belongings were missing. There were visible signs of trauma, including bruising and abrasions. suggesting she had been overpowered. There was no object nearby that could explain what happened. It was clear someone had tried to conceal the crime. Law enforcement secured the area immediately and began initial forensic procedures. Investigators documented footprints in the sand, examined the surrounding area, and interviewed people who might have seen Toya the previous day. A key observation was the absence of drag marks, suggesting the crime occurred close to where her body was found. The person responsible had either been waiting for her or encountered her by chance. A formal report of a violent crime was filed, and the collection of physical evidence began. Samples of sand, shoe prints, and biological material were collected from within a roughly 160-foot radius. Based on the scene, authorities suspected the motive might have involved intentional violence. However, they did not immediately confirm this to the public. The news of Toya's death quickly spread throughout the community. Local media reported the tragic death of a young woman at a secluded beach, causing public alarm. Many women in the Cairns area became afraid to walk alone. Authorities publicly promised to do everything possible to identify the person responsible and bring them to justice. Police began reviewing surveillance footage from highway cameras, shopping centers, and public areas to trace Toya's movements in the hours before her death. At the same time, DNA samples were being collected for comparison with the evidence found at the scene. Toya's body was transported to Brisbane for a thorough forensic examination to determine the exact cause and time of death, and to look for any signs of targeted violence. From that point on, the case was handled by detectives, forensic analysts, and medical examiners. Surveillance footage showed that Toya had stopped at Rusty's Market in Cairns to buy groceries before going to the beach. She was seen leaving with a bag and walking calmly to her car. Nothing about her behavior or the people around her seemed unusual. Additional footage from cameras along the Captain Cook Highway, which leads to Wangeti Beach, provided only a partial view. There were no surveillance cameras in the area around the beach, making the investigation more difficult. Authorities asked the public for any dashcam footage recorded on the 21st of October between 10 o'clock a.m. and 11 o'clock p.m., especially footage of vehicles near the beach turnoffs or along the coastal road. Investigators carefully reviewed all the received footage, comparing timestamps and vehicle types. Some videos helped track a few cars that entered and exited the beach area that day. One of these was a white SUV, but the driver was identified, interviewed, and ruled out as a suspect. However, several vehicles remained unidentified despite public appeals, and the repeated release of video stills through the media. In addition to reviewing surveillance footage, authorities were actively seeking potential witnesses, such as people who might have been fishing, walking, or relaxing on the beach that day. Officers questioned people who had visited nearby parking areas, gas stations, and convenience stores. Unfortunately, no one reported seeing Toya at the beach that evening. This led investigators to believe that the crime likely occurred in a remote and less visited area of the coastline. Detectives searched for Toya's missing clothing, athletic leggings, a t-shirt, flip-flops, and a rubber bracelet. Despite thorough searches, none of these items were found. Police asked residents to check their properties, ditches, wooded areas, and roadsides for anything unusual. Some tips were received, but none led to items connected to the case. A medical examination revealed evidence suggesting a violent assault. Law enforcement didn't immediately confirm this publicly, but leaked documents indicated a possible targeted attack before Toya's death. Neck injuries, bruising, and the body's position supported this theory. DNA samples from the body and surrounding area were sent to a Brisbane lab. The results were important, but no matches were found in criminal databases. The lack of evidence and witnesses caused frustration in the media and online. People speculated and shared theories. Meanwhile, investigators continued working, hoping for a breakthrough. Police investigated every lead, tracking routes, verifying alibis, and examining social connections. Several weeks after Toya's death, the investigation focused on Rajwinder Singh. He was an Australian citizen of Indian descent, living in Innisfail, 90 minutes from the crime scene, and working as a nurse. He was suspected due to several remarkable coincidences, including his behavior at the time of Toya's disappearance on 21 October 2018. When Toya went missing, cell tower data showed he was near Wangeti Beach. This matched the time Toya was believed to be there. Investigators were also concerned that Rajwinder stopped going to work without notice and abruptly left his home, wife, and sons. The following day, 22 October, he abruptly left Australia. He bought a one-way ticket to Delhi and boarded the flight without telling his employer or friends. He traveled light, and the booking was rushed. Since there were no formal charges against him, the border agents couldn't stop him. He left behind his wife's passport, belongings, and medical records without explanation. Once DNA results came back, authorities found a strong match with samples from Rajwinder. Footprints matching his were also found near the crime scene, giving investigators reason to issue charges. However, Rajwinder was already in India and couldn't be reached through official channels. He wasn't responding to communications and, according to Australian officials, no longer lived at his registered address. Investigators reviewed Rajwinder's medical history, which showed he'd sought treatment for hand injuries shortly after Toya's disappearance. These included cuts and bruises, which experts believed could have come from a physical fight. Forensic findings confirmed that Toya had fought back. Her body showed signs of a struggle, including defensive marks on her arms and face, likely from the attack. Rajwinder's actions after leaving Australia were suspicious. He didn't settle in one place or register with local authorities in India. Relatives reported he moved frequently and rarely stayed home. He sometimes pretended to be a pilgrim to stay in temples and used fake names. Living without identification helped him avoid police attention. His wife and sons stayed in Australia. He communicated with his family rarely and vaguely. His wife said she didn't know the details of the crime, but noticed he became withdrawn and tense before he disappeared. By the time Rajwinder was publicly named, Australian police had gathered a lot of evidence. They got an arrest warrant and asked Interpol for help. Rajwinder was put on an international wanted list. Australia asked India to extradite him, but Indian officials said they needed a completed pre-trial investigation and detailed evidence first. This began a long period of Rajwinder avoiding capture. Indian police occasionally received tips about his location, but they couldn't catch him. In Australia, the case was still a major public concern. Each mention of Rajwinder's name led to renewed public pressure on the government to speed up the extradition. Meanwhile, the investigation into the Toya case focuses on two things: collecting and analyzing evidence in Australia and working with Indian authorities. Frustrated by the lack of progress, Australian officials increased pressure. The Queensland government provided more money to speed up the investigation. In November 2021, the police chief announced a reward of $1 million Australian dollars for information leading to Rajwinder's capture. He emphasized that solving Toya's case was a high priority. The reward got attention in Indian media. As the story spread, new tips about Rajwinder's possible location came in. Some reports said he was seen in religious communities in Punjab, while others suggested he was hiding with relatives under a false name. Australian authorities shared this information with Indian police, leading to several searches. In November 2022, 4 years after the crime, Rajwinder was finally arrested in Delhi. He was found in the Janakpuri area, walking alone without identification. He didn't resist arrest. At first, he denied being Rajwinder Singh, but after being identified, he admitted He was the man who had fled Australia in October 2018. His arrest was officially confirmed. India's Ministry of Home Affairs announced that the extradition process had begun. Rajwinder was jailed in Delhi and given a lawyer. In his first court appearance, he said he didn't want to be extradited to Australia because he didn't trust the legal system and feared bias. This started a long legal process that lasted for months. Australia increased its diplomatic efforts. International law experts were brought in. Authorities formally documented all reasons for extradition, including expert reports and case materials. For the first time since Toya's death, there was a real chance the suspect would face trial. But there were still many legal procedures, appeals, and questions about citizenship. During one interrogation, Rajwinder surprisingly admitted to being involved in the crime. The statement was recorded. However, a few days later, he changed his story, saying his confession was forced and untrue. He claimed he had nothing to do with Toya's death. In a written statement, Rajwinder claimed the case was more complex than investigators suggested. He proposed a strange theory. There were 2 offenders and 2 victims at Wangeti Beach, implying he only witnessed someone else's actions. This theory lacked evidence, but intrigued his lawyers and complicated the legal proceedings. The Indian court agreed to hear Rajwinder's claim, further delaying the case. The legal process stalled repeatedly. Hearings were postponed, and the defense filed numerous objections, citing concerns about Rajwinder's rights. Despite this, in 2023, an Indian court approved the extradition request, determining that the documents from Australian authorities met international standards, allowing Rajwinder to be returned for trial. India's Minister of Home Affairs gave final approval. Preparations then began for Rajwinder's secure transfer. In November 2023, he was formally handed over to Australian law enforcement and brought to Queensland. State police officials met him and placed him in a secure detention facility. The flight and transfer were kept secret to prevent leaks or interference. Soon after arriving, formal charges were filed against Rajwinder, primarily for the intentional killing of Toya Cordingly on October 21, 2018. The court ordered Rajwinder to remain in custody without bail. Prosecutors emphasized that Rajwinder had previously fled the country, evading justice for years, making him a flight risk. They also highlighted the seriousness of the violent crime and its cruelty. With Rajwinder back in Australia, trial preparations officially began. Authorities assured the public of a transparent legal process. Meanwhile, new details from the case files, previously confidential, emerged. One revelation involved Toya's personal life. She had contact with another man named Tyson, a foodkara specialist. This detail was initially overlooked until investigators analyzed messages and phone data months after the incident. It revealed Toya might have had a romantic relationship outside of her partnership with Marco. Toya and Tyson began communicating casually a few weeks before the incident, exchanging online messages that soon became personal and emotionally open. Investigators found direct and vulnerable messages from Toya in chat histories and archived social media. She shared her emotional struggles, doubts about her relationship with Marco, and her desire for change. In one message, she expressed her frustration and mentioned Marco's tantrums, saying he was losing control again, that she didn't feel safe, and that maybe it was time to end it. Another message expressed her wish for a break from the pressure. While no message directly accused Marco of wrongdoing, they showed emotional strain and Toya's growing distance from him. She also told Tyson she was hiding their conversations. Initially, investigators lacked this information because Toya's phone had missing chat records, and her messaging app didn't automatically back up deleted content. Advanced digital forensics recovered some erased data, revealing that Toya had kept parts of her life private from Marco and that her behavior may have appeared distant or suspicious to him. This was a key breakthrough. With this new evidence, investigators re-examined Marco, who had previously been considered only a witness. The hidden messages and relationship tension prompted a re-evaluation of his alibi and movements on the day Toya disappeared. The timeline shows Marco was in Cairns when Toya disappeared. Work records and surveillance footage partially confirmed this. However, new messages prompted police to re-examine these records, focusing on the period between 2:00 p.m. and 9:00 p.m., when Toya was likely at the beach. During those hours, Marco's phone activity decreased sharply. He became unresponsive to messages and later sent an unusual text. Additionally, a report surfaced that his car was seen near the Captain Cook Highway exit that evening, contradicting his statement that he stayed within central Cairns. These inconsistencies led to a second round of questioning. Marco confirmed being in Cairns, but struggled to explain the gaps in his movements. He denied involvement in Toya's disappearance and claimed ignorance of her relationship with another man. Although there wasn't enough evidence to charge him, his answers raised concerns and warranted further investigation. Investigators then cross-referenced movement data for everyone mentioned in Toya's communications, including phone records, travel patterns, surveillance footage, and witness statements. Tyson's location was verified in another city, making it impossible for him to be near the scene. He was ruled out as a suspect. This information led investigators to believe Toya was experiencing significant internal conflict before her disappearance. These findings were added to the case file, despite the main suspect, Rajwinder Singh, being in custody. Investigators didn't rule out the possibility of other individuals being involved. Questions about motives, emotional dynamics, and hidden details remained. 6 years after Toya's death, the case went to trial on the 22nd of July, 2024, at the Cairns District Court, attracting significant public attention. Despite substantial evidence, no verdict has been reached. The prosecution argues that Rajwinder acted alone, committed the crime with extreme cruelty, and fled the country to avoid justice. They suggested the motive involved inappropriate intent that escalated, but direct evidence of this is limited and remains unresolved. The defense argues that the case is based on circumstantial evidence. Rajwinder's attorneys maintain his innocence, claiming his prior confession in India was coerced and made without legal representation. They highlighted the lack of eyewitnesses and questioned the interpretation of DNA evidence, arguing it doesn't conclusively prove his involvement. A cryptic statement Rajwinder made during his extradition added complexity, but he later refused to elaborate, and his legal team unsuccessfully tried to have it excluded. Witnesses include police officers, forensic experts, medical professionals, Toya's former co-workers, and people who interacted with Rajwinder in India. However, key question persists. Could someone else have been involved? How significant were the tensions between Toya and Marco? Why hasn't an eyewitness come forward? These questions fuel public debate, but aren't formally part of the current charges. The hearings continue, and the judge is reviewing all evidence. Questioning is ongoing, and forensic experts are still submitting findings. Toya's parents are present at the proceedings but haven't made public statements. Their quiet presence emphasizes the personal impact of the trial. The court's eventual verdict will conclude a long and painful process. For now, the case remains open, marked by unanswered questions, arguments, and the hope that the truth will emerge through the justice system. A loud argument broke out in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town. Neighbors were used to the screams coming from the house, but tonight it was different. The sounds of screaming, banging, and muffled sobbing grew louder, as if signaling something was about to go too far. Then, just a few minutes later, a call came through the emergency line. The voice on the other end was shaky and broken. As if the caller was in a state of confusion and despair. It was the beginning of one of the most controversial cases the town of Dubuque had ever seen. Dubuque, a city stretched along the banks of the Mississippi River, at first glance looks like a classic Midwestern town with rolling hills, historic districts, and postcard charm. But beneath that surface lies a complicated history. For decades, Dubuque was known as a stronghold of a notorious hate group with deep roots in the region. In the 1922, the group was highly influential, organizing rallies, pressuring local officials, and gaining open support from many white residents. This troubling legacy left scars on the city's social fabric. Entire neighborhoods were divided along racial lines. African American families were pushed into specific areas, and for years, schools and jobs remained largely inaccessible to minorities. Even into the late 20th century, federal reports listed Dubuque as one of the least welcoming places in the country for Black Americans. During the 1982 and 1990s, tensions flared again. Threatening graffiti appeared, homes were targeted with arson, and city leaders were forced to roll out anti-discrimination programs. Still, even in the 21st century, hostility lingered. From street-level aggression to inflammatory posts online, the contrast between Dubuque's picturesque image and its deeper social struggles has always been striking. On one side, historic churches, a respected university, and breathtaking views of the Mississippi. On the other, a legacy of racial intolerance, social friction, and long-standing mistrust between communities. It was in this atmosphere of prejudice and unspoken conflict that a story unfolded, one that would soon draw national attention. Fontainebleau grew up in Dubuque in a well-regarded family, was known from a young age for his love of sports and natural social charisma. His confidence and charm made him a popular figure among his friends throughout high school and into college. Samantha Link's story was different. Raised in a household that valued hard work, discipline, she turned to athletics early on, pushing herself to prove her strength and determination. In her teens, she was diagnosed with mental health conditions that required ongoing medical supervision and daily medication. While the treatments helped her maintain balance, they also caused mood swings, occasional irritability. She had also endured difficult past relationships, marked by control and emotional pressure. That history left deep scars, a fear of losing control, a constant need for reassurance. Outwardly, though, Samantha appeared energetic, someone with clear goals and the willpower to chase them. They first met at a party hosted by their mutual friend Cassie. The night was filled with music and laughter, a seemingly ordinary gathering that turned into a pivotal moment. Fonte was in his element, cracking jokes, drawing people in with his charm. Samantha watched him with a mix of caution and curiosity. When they finally spoke, it quickly became clear they shared similar interests and values. It was obvious something was sparking between them. Within days, casual texts and evening walks blossomed into something more serious. Before long, they decided to move in together. Their friends were surprised at how quickly things escalated. It was as if they had skipped the getting-to-know-you stage entirely and jumped straight into a full-blown commitment. But under one roof, their differences became hard to ignore. Samantha craved stability and a calm home environment where her emotional well-being was prioritized. Fonte, however, clung to his familiar lifestyle, late nights, parties, and constant outings with friends. What felt like neglect to her seemed completely normal to him. Initially, their differences seemed like complementary opposites, creating a fragile sense of balance. However, as time passed, Their different needs created problems in the relationship. Their contrasting ideas about what a partnership meant slowly damaged their connection. To outsiders, they still looked like the picture-perfect couple. Fontaine, the charismatic figure who drew attention everywhere he went, and Samantha, the quiet, grounding presence at his side. But those closer to them began to notice early red flags. Samantha grew increasingly uneasy about Fontaine's openness with other women. He, in turn, brushed off her concerns with laughter, dismissing them as jealousy, which only deepened her distrust. On the surface, their relationship remained intact. They still talked about the future, stood by each other during difficult times, and tried to maintain closeness. But beneath that facade, tension was quietly building. For Samantha, being with Fontaine meant a chance at stability, a reliable partner she could depend on. For him, it was more about excitement, attention, and connection. These mismatched intentions became increasingly obvious to those around them. The strain soon began to take its toll. Samantha's life was tightly bound to her medication schedule and regular medical checkups. But Fontaine didn't always take this seriously. He believed his role was to support her during the hard moments, but not to structure his entire life around her needs. Minor frustrations began to stack up. His tardiness, broken promises, and carefree acceptance of party invitations even when she wasn't feeling well. Her sharp reactions often sounded to him like relentless criticism, which he dismissed as overdramatic. She asked more frequently about their future, hoping for reassurance. While he deflected, unwilling to commit to specifics, her anxiety grew, and with it, his irritation. Still, the bond between them didn't disappear. This push and pull, deep attachment, mixed with rising frustration, became the defining pattern of their relationship. After yet another heated argument, Samantha left to stay with her mother, hoping distance would give her clarity. Eventually, though, they agreed to return home together. The car ride back was suffocating, long stretches of silence broken by bursts of blame. Neither wanted to be the first to back down. For Fontaine, this reconciliation felt like a crossroads. He was beginning to realize the relationship had reached its breaking point. Samantha, on the other hand, couldn't hide her anger and pressed him relentlessly, escalating every conversation. Back at the house, peace was short-lived. Within hours, another argument erupted. Samantha demanded proof of his commitment, pleading for reassurance that he was serious about a long-term future. Fontaine answered with cold detachment, saying her expectations were unrealistic and that he felt trapped by her demands. Soon after, he made a decision. Ending the relationship was, in his mind, the only way to escape the emotional weight pressing down on him. He told her directly he no longer saw a future for them. For Samantha, the breakup was devastating. She had built her stability around him and wasn't ready to let go. As emotions spiraled, a new blow landed. A video posted by Fontaine, speaking directly to his audience. He made remarks that could easily be interpreted as thinly veiled references to their problems. To Samantha, it felt like mockery, his way of dismissing her and airing their struggles in public. For her, it was undeniable proof he had no intention of reconciling. What began as emotional strain quickly escalated into confrontation. During one heated dispute, Fontaine reportedly told Samantha he wanted her out of the house, that her presence had become unbearable. This wasn't just a moment of anger. That moment marked a critical tipping point. With his video circulating and their fights intensifying, the fragile balance between them was about to shatter. Later, Fontaine claimed that after their heated argument, Samantha, overwhelmed and emotionally unstable, impulsively grabbed a kitchen knife and injured herself. He insisted it was an act of self-harm. not violence from him. According to his account, he even tried to stop her but failed. But the scene first responders encountered told a very different story. Paramedics arrived to find Samantha lifeless on the kitchen floor, bearing 3 stab wounds to vital areas. The placement of her body and the nature of the wounds simply did not align with Fonte's version. While medics worked desperately to save her, officers observed Fonte closely. What they saw was not shock or grief, but hostility. Witnesses later recalled him shouting at police, arguing with them, and displaying aggressive, confrontational behavior. To officers, it was a clear signal this was no mere domestic dispute. It was something far more serious. Once in custody, Fonte's statements immediately raised red flags. When pressed for details about the timing of events and his exact actions, his answers were vague, inconsistent, and often shifted under scrutiny. Detectives quickly suspected he was concealing the truth. Then came the most damning discovery: his phone. A recording captured just before the incident revealed a tense atmosphere filled with threats and aggression from Fonte. Far from calm or composed, his voice dripped with hostility. The tone of the video stood in stark contrast to his claim that he had only tried to protect Samantha, shredding his credibility. Text messages recovered from the device added another layer. They showed days of heated arguments, accusations, and emotional tension. The incident was clearly the culmination of ongoing turmoil. Medical examiners reinforced this conclusion. They determined Samantha's injuries were consistent with a violent struggle, not self-inflicted wounds. The angle, depth, and force of the stabs made the prospect of self-harm virtually impossible. Investigators gathered more evidence from neighbors and nearby security cameras. Multiple residents reported hearing terrified screams that night. Every new piece of testimony pointed away from self-harm and toward a brutal confrontation. Fonte's explanation now looked less like truth and more like a hastily constructed defense. From the very beginning, Samantha's family had voiced their doubts. They told investigators she had never expressed self-harm thoughts and was focused on her future. Her mother, especially, emphasized that Samantha had plans, goals, and no history of impulsive self-harm. Their testimony directly contradicted Fonte's attempt to paint her as unstable. As the investigation deepened, public reaction intensified. Local media covered the story closely, and on social media, outrage spread rapidly. Many in the community saw Fonte's narrative as a desperate attempt to deflect blame. For Samantha's loved ones, it was not just about disproving his claims, it was about demanding justice. What began as a domestic dispute had now escalated into one of the most scrutinized criminal cases in the area. Each revelation fueled public anger and strengthened the resolve of Samantha's family, ensuring the case would not fade quietly, but remain a test of truth, justice, and accountability. A series of meticulous forensic examinations were commissioned in an effort to clarify the circumstances of the tragedy. Medical specialists carefully assessed the wounds sustained by Samantha Link, noting striking details. The injuries varied in depth, direction, and force, suggesting multiple blows delivered during a struggle. Psychological evaluations added further weight to the findings. Records showed that Samantha had never been diagnosed with a serious mental disorder, nor was she under ongoing psychiatric observation. There was no documented history of instability that could support the claim she had acted in a sudden breakdown. These conclusions marked a turning point in the investigation. Combined with the digital evidence and testimony from friends and neighbors, they dismantled the defense's early narrative. The consensus among experts was unequivocal. The theory that Samantha harmed herself was implausible. For prosecutors, it was the foundation they needed to push the case toward trial with renewed confidence. When the trial of Fonte Buello commenced in Rockwell County, Texas, anticipation was high. Locals were unfamiliar with such a sensational case. The court was packed with onlookers, reporters, and local residents eager to witness the proceedings. The judge presided, a figure known for his rigid style and no-nonsense rulings. His choice to restrict discussion about Samantha's prior psychological consultations sparked immediate debate. By prohibiting references to her visits with mental health professionals, he effectively blocked the jury from hearing evidence that might have offered a fuller understanding of her emotional state. Many legal observers criticized the ruling as a limitation that tilted the balance of the case. In the courtroom, the prosecution leaned heavily on science. They highlighted bruises on Samantha's arms and shoulders, injuries that clearly pointed to restraint or physical conflict rather than voluntary harm. Crime scene photographs revealed a kitchen in disarray, with blood patterns that supported the scenario of a violent struggle. These details left jurors with a vivid image of the chaos that had unfolded. The defense countered with a familiar strategy, portraying Fonte as a man trapped in an escalating situation. They argued he had acted in self-defense after Samantha lashed out during an emotional outburst. Text messages were presented as evidence of her volatility. But those arguments were steadily eroded by witnesses who painted a different picture. Samantha's friends testified she was looking ahead, discussing a new job opportunity and planning an upcoming trip. Evidence that directly contradicted claims she was unstable or preparing to harm herself. The most dramatic moment came when prosecutors played an audio recording recovered from Fonte's phone. His voice could be heard, sharp and cutting. To the prosecution, this was the sound of frustration boiling over, a precursor to violence. The defense tried to minimize its significance, calling it a casual remark taken out of context. However, both the jury and the public seemed to interpret the recording as part of a larger pattern of tension and conflict. Meanwhile, Fonte's conduct on the stand left jurors uneasy. He stumbled over timelines, contradicted earlier statements, and often refused to give direct answers. Each inconsistency further damaged his credibility, reinforcing the prosecution's portrait of a man trying to obscure the truth rather than reveal it. As proceedings dragged on, the divide between prosecution and defense sharpened. One side presented a case built on consistency, expert testimony, and hard evidence. The other leaned on speculation and selective interpretation. But the most decisive battles took place behind closed doors. Jury deliberations quickly grew heated, with members split between doubt and certainty. Some pressed for conviction, citing the overwhelming medical evidence, while others hesitated, swayed by lingering questions. Reports later surfaced of intense internal pressure. A letter written by juror admitted he felt coerced not only by more assertive jurors, but also by the judge, who repeatedly urged them to reach consensus rather than deadlock. The judge's role itself became a focal point. Far from remaining neutral, he was seen pushing the jury toward unity, interrupting defense attorneys, and shutting down lines of questioning that might have benefited Fonte. Journalists covering the trial described a courtroom where judicial authority sometimes overshadowed fairness, creating an imbalance that would later resurface during appeals. The public's interest in the case intensified outside the courthouse. Samantha's family spoke often to the media, portraying her as a victim of manipulation and violence, and Fonte as the perpetrator. Local newspapers published emotional stories about Samantha's last days, with quotes from friends, family highlighting her kindness and strength. A critical moment arrived when previously undisclosed messages from Samantha's personal conversations were introduced in court. These texts revealed her intention to leave the relationship and focus on building a new future for herself. For prosecutors, it was devastating to the defense's claims. Any suggestion that she was unstable or incapable of making decisions collapsed under the weight of her own words. The jury was no longer weighing competing versions of events. They were already considering the severity of the punishment. Internal pressure within the jury room and the judge's firm stance had shifted the momentum firmly toward the prosecution. After weeks of testimony, forensic evidence, and conflicting legal arguments, the courtroom braced for the final moment. The atmosphere was tense enough to silence the crowd. The judge read the verdict aloud. Fontaine was found guilty of the charges against Samantha Link and sentenced to 50 years in prison. A heavy silence filled the room, followed by a wave of mixed reactions. Fontaine didn't outwardly panic upon hearing the sentence, but the strain on his face was unmistakable. He had denied responsibility throughout the trial, and even in the face of the final ruling, he continued to maintain his innocence. His immediate response was to announce plans to appeal the decision, claiming that the evidence had been misinterpreted and that the full context of that night had not been fairly considered. Samantha's family was visibly relieved by the verdict. They felt justice had been served, though they still grieved an irreplaceable loss. Family members in the courtroom cried openly, thanked the prosecutors and the court, expressing that the verdict brought them a long-awaited sense of closure. Public reaction, however, was far more divided. Many believed the sentence was just and reflected the strength of the evidence presented. Others questioned the fairness of the trial, arguing that media pressure and courtroom imbalances had stacked the odds against Fontaine from the beginning. His supporters pointed to specific grievances, such as the controversial removal of a juror and restrictions imposed on defense, claiming the process was tainted and should have been declared a mistrial. In the weeks following sentencing, the community itself split into camps. Some viewed Fontaine as a manipulative offender who had finally been held accountable. Others saw him as a man condemned by a system, eager for a conviction. Advocacy groups began forming, calling for a review of the case, while counter voices argued that the evidence was overwhelming and that reopening the matter would only prolong the suffering of Samantha's family. Rather than closing the book, the verdict ignited a fresh round of debate. To his critics, Fontaine embodied cold-blooded violence. To his supporters, he was another casualty of a flawed judicial system. His attorneys moved quickly, filing notices of appeal and alleging serious procedural missteps. They argued that video footage used in court had been stripped of context, twisting casual remarks into sinister threats. They also claimed investigators had targeted Fontaine as the prime suspect from the beginning, refusing to explore other possibilities. The appeals court agreed to review the case, but the process promised to be long and arduous. Meanwhile, Fontaine remained behind bars, his supporters organizing rallies and online campaigns in his name. To some, it was a fight for justice. To others, it was nothing more than a desperate attempt to rewrite a verdict that had already been decided. As preparations for the appeal advanced, the defense team brought in independent experts to bolster their version of events. Forensic psychologists and criminal investigators were introduced, some of whom argued that, under extreme emotional distress, the wounds on Samantha's body could be interpreted as self-inflicted. Another specialist pointed out that there were no direct eyewitnesses to the fatal altercation, suggesting the jury had relied heavily on circumstantial evidence. The prosecution quickly countered with its own battery of experts. They emphasized the directionality of blood spatter, the precise angles of the wounds, and the position of Samantha's body in the kitchen, all details that strongly indicated the injuries had been inflicted by someone else. Meanwhile, the media shifted its focus beyond the courtroom, digging into the couple's personal history. Old social media posts resurfaced. Friends and co-workers were interviewed, and new details began to circulate. Some accounts portrayed Samantha as someone who had voiced repeated concerns about Fontaine's temper and controlling behavior. Others painted a different picture, describing her as impulsive and occasionally volatile during moments of stress. The result was a battle of interpretations, not just between lawyers, but also among experts, journalists, and the public. Some professionals argued that the case had leaned too heavily on inference and lacked a definitive smoking gun. Others maintained that the convergence of evidence, from forensic findings to text messages, made the guilty verdict both justified and necessary. This division transformed the trial into more than just a legal proceeding. It became a cultural flashpoint. Talk shows debated it nightly, editorials dissected every new revelation, and online forums buzzed with arguments from both sides. By now, the case had transcended the courtroom. Investigative journalists kept the story alive with follow-up reports, some uncovering financial disputes related to Samantha's estate, others highlighting conflicts within her family. Social media intensified the polarization, with advocacy groups springing up in support of Fonte, convinced he was the victim of a miscarriage of justice, while opposing groups rallied to defend the verdict as a long-overdue act of accountability. In the end, the saga of Fonte and Samantha became more than the tragic story of two people. It stood as one of the most polarizing legal battles of its time, a case that revealed cracks in the justice system, stirred debates within professional circles, and split public opinion down the middle. Long after the courtroom lights dimmed, the case remained etched into collective memory, both as a cautionary tale and as a cultural mirror reflecting society's deepest divisions. In Cottonwood Heights, Utah, at 11:47 p.m., a call was secretly recorded. During that conversation, Jennifer confessed to her lover that she had killed her husband, Matthew. From that moment on, the truth about a seemingly perfect marriage began to emerge, leading to one of the most shocking family crimes in Utah. Jennifer Gledill and Matthew Johnson seemed to have it all. Living in their million-dollar home in Cottonwood Heights, Utah, they appeared to be the perfect family, a devoted military husband and a caring mother, raising their three children, aged 11, 7, and 5. Matthew, 51, was a respected member of the Utah National Guard's 19th Special Forces Group. Known for his reliability and brilliance, his fellow soldiers said he was the kind of man they could always count on for answers. Jennifer, 42, was seen as a devoted mother and supportive military wife, whom many of Matthew's friends described as nice and rather reclusive, but beneath the surface, their marriage had begun to fracture months earlier. In August 2024, Jennifer filed for a temporary protective order against Matthew, claiming she needed protection from him. Yet, when the case reached 3rd District Commissioner Russell Minus, he dismissed the request. The commissioner noted that text messages from Jennifer to Matthew were repeatedly berating, belittling, and demeaning, if not outright attempts to goad him into a violent response. On the 16th of September, 2024, just days before the tragedy that would shatter their family forever, Commissioner Minus dismissed the protective order, ruling that no abuse had occurred. In the weeks leading up to September, Matthew's friends noticed changes. Jennifer's behavior had become so erratic that Matthew sometimes stayed overnight at a National Guard facility, telling those close to him that he feared for his safety. In one of his final conversations with a longtime friend, retired Guardsman Kevin Thompson, Matthew said he was ready to move on and file for divorce. Behind his back, Jennifer was living a double life. She was deeply involved in an affair with another man, an affair so intense that it consumed her thoughts. On the 19th of September, just days before Matthew's death, Jennifer showed her lover a loaded Glock 19X she kept in the home. At the time, he brushed it off. Firearms weren't unusual in a military family, but prosecutors later argued this was part of a calculated plan She had arranged for their 3 children to stay at her parents' house the night she planned to kill Matthew. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would end in tragedy. The 20th of September, 2024, began like any other day. But by evening, the fragile facade of the marriage would finally crumble. Matthew had discovered the truth about his wife's affair, and witnesses would later report hearing a heated argument between the couple that night. According to Jennifer's later confession, Matthew confronted her, yelling because he knew she had been sleeping with someone else. The argument was intense, years of marital problems finally exploding into the open. What happened next would haunt everyone who learned about it. In the early hours of the 21st of September, 2024, as Matthew lay sleeping in their master bedroom, completely vulnerable and unaware of the danger, Jennifer made a decision that would destroy him forever. She took his own 9mm handgun and shot him in the head while he slept. By her own confession, she then put Matthew's body into a rooftop storage container, sliding it down the stairs of their home before loading it into the back of their minivan. She smashed his phone and drove his truck to a nearby neighborhood, abandoning it blocks from their home. Then, in what can only be described as a methodical cover-up, Jennifer drove north with her husband's body and buried him in a shallow grave at a location that remains unknown to this day. When she returned home, she began an extensive cleanup operation. She bleached the walls, used carpet cleaning supplies throughout the master bedroom, and ordered a new mattress to replace the blood-soaked one where Matthew had been killed. The mattress arrived just 2 days later, but Jennifer's most critical mistake was yet to come. On the 22nd of September, just before midnight, Jennifer showed up at her lover's home and made a confession that would ultimately lead to her arrest. She told him everything: how she had killed Matthew, how she had disposed of his body, and how she had cleaned up the crime scene. The man noticed bruises on Jennifer's body during their conversation, and when he asked about them, she casually explained that she had gotten them while burying her husband and cleaning the house of evidence. Her lover was terrified by what he had heard. Jennifer, whom he thought he knew, had just confessed to cold-blooded murder with an almost casual demeanor. The truth was about to come out, and it was worse than anyone imagined. Jennifer's lover was so disturbed by her confession that he decided to record their next phone conversation. When he told Jennifer that he was frightened by what she had told him, her response was chilling and would become one of the most haunting pieces of evidence in the case. She exclaimed that she thinks she could even hurt a fly, and said that Matthew's not a person. He wasn't a person anymore. The cold detachment in her voice was unmistakable. She had dehumanized her husband so completely that his death meant nothing to her. But Jennifer's disturbing revelations didn't stop there. When her lover asked if she would do anything differently if she could turn back time, Jennifer replied, no. She also asked her lover not to think of her as a monster and to remember who she was before the confession. The irony was not lost. She was asking for understanding after confessing to murdering the father of her children in cold blood. What made this conversation even more significant was that it took place before Matthew was officially reported missing. Jennifer was already referring to her husband in the past tense. Even though no one else knew he was dead, 6 days after confessing to her lover, Jennifer finally reported Matthew missing to the police. She told them that Matthew had said he would be gone for a week and instructed her not to call him. Meanwhile, the Utah National Guard had already begun searching for Matthew when he failed to report for duty on the 23rd of September. Unbeknownst to Jennifer, her lover had been collecting evidence against her, including screenshots of their text messages and recordings of their phone conversations. On the 2nd of October, 2024, he contacted the police with information that would crack the case wide open. On the 2nd of October, 2024, armed with the recorded confessions and physical evidence, police arrested Jennifer Gledill on charges of first-degree murder and obstruction of justice. When Cottonwood Heights, Utah police executed a search warrant on the Gledill home, they discovered a scene that told a very different story than the one Jennifer had presented. In the master bedroom, investigators found a large blood-stained spot on the carpet beneath the bed. Blood was also found on the bed frame slats, which corroborated Jennifer's confession to her lover. The house reeked of bleach, and there were reddish-brown stains on the walls, bed frame, and blinds. Tellingly, the mattress in the bedroom was brand new. Phone records later revealed that Jennifer had ordered it on the 24th of September, just 3 days after the murder. It had been delivered 2 days later. During the investigation, police also discovered GPS data from Jennifer's phone showing her movements on the 21st of September and 22nd. The data showed her traveling to the location where Matthew's truck was found at around 6:00 a.m., and later tracking her journey north toward Davis County, exactly where she claimed to have buried his body. But the investigation was far from over. On the 24th of October, 2024, Jennifer's parents, Thomas Gledill, 71, and Rosalie Gledill, 68, were also arrested and charged with 4 counts of obstruction of justice. Police discovered that they had spent over 5 hours at Jennifer's house in late September, despite initially claiming they were only there for less than an hour to pick up clothing. Investigators found that Rosalie had purchased the new mattress and had her phone remotely reset, erasing all data about her whereabouts during the cleanup period. When police questioned Thomas about the master bedroom and the alleged cleanup, he said he did not go in where the incident happened, inadvertently revealing knowledge of a crime scene. During a search of Jennifer's parents' home, police found a Glock 19X gun box wrapped in a child's onesie inside a plastic tote near Jennifer's bedroom. The container matched the description of the gun Jennifer had shown to her lover on the 19th of September. The family had tried to cover up the perfect murder, but their web of lies was quickly unraveling. Months have passed since Jennifer's arrest, but Matthew Johnson's body remains missing. Extensive search efforts have covered multiple counties, extending from Davis counties all the way to Box Elder County near the Utah border. Over 70 searchers have participated in the ongoing efforts to find Matthew, including law enforcement, volunteers, and Matthew's own military friends who have organized their own search parties. As his friend Kevin Thompson said, "The fact that the search is now in its 5th month keeps them up at night." John Hash, Matthew's fellow Green Beret, who served with him for 12 years, has been frustrated by the ongoing search efforts. He said, having had Jennifer in his home before, breaking bread with them, it turned out she's responsible for Matthew's death. It was shocking. Frankly, during recent court hearings, prosecutors revealed that a vehicle storage container had been found floating in water and it contained Matthew's blood inside. This discovery provided additional physical evidence linking Jennifer to the crime, but Matthew's body still hasn't been recovered. The search continues to expand across northern Utah as investigators follow every lead, hoping to finally bring Matthew home to his family. They were about to discover a secret Jennifer had hoped would never see the light of day. Jennifer Gledill has pleaded not guilty to all charges against her. She faces 1 count of first-degree murder, 5 counts of obstruction of justice, 1 count of possession of a controlled substance, 1 count of abuse or desecration of a human body, and 1 count of tampering with a witness. During her bail hearing, prosecutors argued that Jennifer posed a significant danger to the community and to the integrity of the investigation. They revealed that she had told her lover she would shoot herself rather than go to jail, demonstrating both her desperation and potential for further violence. The judge sided with the prosecutors and denied Jennifer's request for bail, noting the risk she posed to the community. She remains in custody at the Salt Lake County Jail. Adding another layer of complexity to the case is the matter of Matthew's $500,000 credential life insurance policy, with Jennifer named as the beneficiary. Because Jennifer is facing murder charges and Matthew's body is still missing, Prudential has asked the court to determine who should receive the money. Jennifer's trial is scheduled to begin on the 8th of December, 2025, and is expected to last 8 days. Perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of this case is the plight of the 3 children who have lost both parents, one to murder and one to imprisonment. Matthew Johnson's family has released a statement through their victim representative saying they are hopeful that they will find Matthew soon, or that Jennifer or someone will come forward with the location of his body so they can properly lay him to rest. The prosecution's theory is straightforward but chilling. Jennifer Gledill killed her husband because he discovered her affair, and she wanted to be free to pursue her relationship with her lover rather than go through a messy divorce that might have resulted in shared custody and financial obligations. She chose murder. As we await Jennifer Gledhill's trial in December 2025, one question haunts everyone involved in this case. How does a mother of 3 justify destroying so many lives for the sake of an affair? Perhaps we'll never fully understand the depths of her selfishness and cruelty. What we do know is that her actions have created wounds that will never fully heal. Justice may eventually be served, but Matthew Johnson will never come home to his children, and somewhere in northern Utah, a devoted father and soldier lies in an unmarked grave, waiting for someone to finally tell the truth about where he can be found. On May 24, 2013, Fabiana Ludzi, a 16-year-old girl from the small town of Corigliano Calabro, Italy, suddenly disappeared, leaving her family in shock and fear. A few days later, the police discovered her body in a remote area, charred and disfigured beyond recognition. The autopsy revealed a truth that shocked the whole of Italy. Fabiana had not only been stabbed more than 20 times, but while still gasping for breath, she had been doused with gasoline and set on fire by her boyfriend, Davide Marone. However, what outraged the public even more was the sentence handed down to the perpetrator of this barbaric crime. Although the act showed signs of being premeditated, Davide was not tried as an adult, but only as a teenager. He received a sentence that was considered too light for the crime that took the life of a young woman, leaving her family with an indelible pain. And since then, a question has haunted Italy. How could a man who stabbed, burned, and murdered a girl receive such a light sentence? How many more lives will be lost before justice is truly on the side of those who died? Fabiana Ludzi grew up in a close-knit family in Corigliano Calabro, Italy. She was energetic, active, and strong-willed, traits that became especially clear in her teenage years. She didn't like being bossed around by her parents and started thinking about moving out. This tension led to frequent conflicts, and by 16, Fabiana decided to live on her own. She rented an apartment not far from her family and took a part-time job to support herself. At first, her income wasn't enough, so her parents helped financially. Despite the conflicts at home, Fabiana was a good student. Her parents had high hopes for her. By 2013, she was a 16-year-old high school student who loved dancing and was taking accounting courses, planning a future in that field. She was also in an on and off relationship after she moved out. Her relationship with her parents improved. With fewer daily arguments, things seemed to stabilize, and Fabiana appeared to be managing adult life well. May 24, 2013, began like any other day. No one expected what was to come. Early that morning, Fabiana left for school. She stayed in touch with her parents by phone, as she usually did, to reassure her mother. She planned to stop by her parents' house after lunch. They were expecting her that evening to continue preparing for their summer vacation. But Fabiana never arrived. Her parents, Mario, Ludzi, and Rosa became worried when she didn't answer her phone. At first, they didn't panic. They went to her apartment, but no one answered the door. Despite persistent knocking, the landlord provided a spare key, and they found the place empty. With Fabiana still not responding, they headed to her school to see if she had stayed late. On the way, they ran into Fabiana's classmate and friend. The girls said Fabiana had left right after classes, and they hadn't seen her since. Alarmed, her parents reported her missing to the police. Initially, both the family and the police suspected she might have run away. She had done so about a year earlier, before her parents allowed her to live independently. In early spring 2012, she had gone to Bologna after long-standing conflicts at home. Back then, the police quickly found her. Friends said she was staying with acquaintances, and although they did not know her exact address, she kept in touch with her family, which made the situation easier to resolve. This time, Rosa tried to believe it was another runaway, but two things didn't add up. First, unlike the previous time, Fabiana hadn't contacted anyone, and her phone was switched off. Second, she had no reason to run away. She already lived on her own and was satisfied with her life. The Carabinieri began questioning Fabiana's friends and acquaintances. She had a wide social circle, many of whom her parents had already called. No one knew where she was. However, useful leads emerged. The police went to her school to speak with classmates and teachers who might have noticed something unusual. Friends said Fabiana was anxious that day because she planned to meet her boyfriend. A classmate saw 17-year-old David Moroni meet her near the school after classes. He arrived on his scooter, which he often used to pick her up. After that meeting, no one saw Fabiana again. This meant her boyfriend was the last known person to have contact with her. According to her friends, an argument began as soon as he arrived. Davide accused her of infidelity, which she denied. As the search continued, no solid leads emerged. Police wanted to question Davide, but he didn't answer his phone and wasn't at home. His parents said he had left for school early that morning and hadn't returned. While trying to find him, the detectives gathered information about his troubled relationship with Fabian. Fabiana's friends consistently described a jealous relationship on both sides. They also said Davide had been unfaithful. Fabiana had told them she once caught him kissing another girl, which led to a breakup. After that, they made up. Police interviewed everyone they could, but couldn't immediately reach Davide. He was also a high school senior, 17 years old, in 2013. Fabiana's family and friends said that after the breakup, Davide repeatedly tried to see her and even came to her home. Refusing to accept her refusal, David remained missing for almost a day. Then he turned up at a hospital with severe burns on his face and hands, serious enough to require treatment. His condition drew police attention because the injuries looked like they came from handling flammable substances. When asked how he was burned, he refused to cooperate. Under pressure, he eventually claimed he had been attacked by strangers on the street. He did have injuries on his hands that could be defensive, but they looked more like wounds sustained while someone else was fighting for their life. The source of the burns remained suspicious. Since Davide wouldn't fully explain them, police did not believe his story. He also flatly denied any involvement in Fabiana's disappearance and insisted they hadn't met that day. Even though multiple witnesses confirmed they had, detectives saw many inconsistencies in his account and concluded he was lying. Still, suspicion alone wasn't enough. They needed concrete evidence about what happened to Fabiana. They held off on releasing Davide, and under continued questioning, he began to change his story. First, he admitted he had picked her up after school. Then he claimed he dropped her off at a friend's house and never saw her again. That was quickly disproven. No one in her circle had seen her after classes. Confronted with this lie, Davide changed his account again. He now admitted he picked Fabiana up on his scooter and that they argued near the school. He accused her of seeing someone else. According to him, the argument continued as they rode away. Fabiana sits behind him, denying infidelity and refuting his accusations. They didn't get far. A few kilometers from the school, he stopped in a secluded area. The argument escalated. They shouted until he lost his temper and announced their relationship was over. He said he then jumped on the scooter and drove away, claiming he had no idea what happened to her. After that, the detectives learned from Davide where everything had happened. 2 officers checked the location but found nothing suspicious. Meanwhile, they spoke with Fabiana's relatives, who all said Davide would never let her go. They described him as obsessive and manipulative, someone who stalked her after she tried several times, unsuccessfully, to end the relationship. This supported the Carabinieri's concerns about Davide's behavior, but they needed stronger evidence. On May 25, 2013, a call came into the local station from a man living a few kilometers from the school. While working in a citrus grove, he found signs of a fire and pieces of what looked like women's clothing. It seemed minor at first, but the police had a detailed description of what Fabiana wore the day she disappeared. The burnt fabric matched. The situation grew more serious. Still, there was no body. Investigators avoided premature conclusions and questioned Davide again. He continued to deny everything, insisting he knew nothing. Notably, the location of the fire was near the area he had previously directed police to, suggesting he may have been trying to distract them. Another day passed. Davide spoke with detectives in the presence of a prosecutor and his lawyer. He began to crack. His story had changed several times, and now he said he would tell the truth. He admitted they had a fight that escalated. He claimed Fabiana attacked him and things spiraled out of control. When he stopped, it was too late. He said he started a large fire to destroy evidence and told the police where to find Fabiana's body. The body was found not far from the site of the fire. Fabiana was dead, and her body was badly burned, requiring testing to fully identify her. All materials were sent for examination. She was identified through dental records as 16 years old, Fabiana Ludzi. Her family was devastated. She died just weeks before her next birthday. Davide said Fabiana attacked first, and he lost control. He claimed he carried a knife for everyday tasks and used it to stab her. Although he called it self-defense, the more than 20 stab wounds on Fabiana's body could not support this claim, especially since Davide only suffered minor injuries. Interrogations continued. Despite his lies, Davide was the only source for details about Fabiana's death, and investigators pressed on. He then said Fabiana fell to the ground and stopped moving, and that he set the body on fire to hide the crime. That was false. Forensic analysis showed Fabiana was alive when she was set on fire. Her lungs were full of smoke. She burned alive. The Carabinieri suspected Davide was still minimizing his guilt. Eventually, Davide admitted Fabiana was alive when he doused her with gasoline and lit the fire. He saw her breathing and trying to get up, and he stopped her. According to the forensic expert, although she suffered more than 20 stab wounds, none struck vital organs or major arteries. She could have died from blood loss, but only after a long time, and she might have survived with timely medical help. That was not what Davide intended. These findings supported the conclusion that the crime was premeditated. Numerous witnesses had described ongoing tension between Fabiana and Davide. Shortly before Fabiana's death, their relationship had reached one of its most turbulent phases. Her best friend said that she had broken up with Davide and was trying to get her life together. She likely had started seeing someone else. For a haunted young man like David, this could have been a powerful motivation to commit a crime. Detectives were struck by how cold-blooded Davide seemed. He appeared emotionless and kept resisting, forcing investigators to extract every word. It took the Carabinieri 2 days of questioning to get the most plausible account. According to Davide, he met Fabiana that day after she finished her classes. He wanted to talk about their relationship again, but she insisted it was over. David refused to accept her decision, believing she simply wanted more attention from him. He chased after her and tried to court her, but he was wrong. She was firm and did not want to reconcile. In the heat of the argument, Fabiana said she already had a new boyfriend and would not get back together. That comment sealed her fate. In a jealous rage, Davide grabbed a knife and stabbed her more than 20 times. It happened in a deserted area on the outskirts of the city. There was no one to intervene, and he did not stop. Even after Fabiana fell to the ground bleeding, she was still alive. Davide still did not call for help. Instead, he went to his scooter, took a small gasoline canister, and poured it over her while she was still alive. He then set her on fire. Fabiana continued to struggle, but she could no longer save herself. The heartbreaking case drew intense public and media attention. Fabiana's family could not accept that their daughter's life ended so tragically. Everyone remembered Fabiana as a cheerful, active girl who had recently been seeking freedom and independence, perhaps a factor that contributed to her death. After moving out and living independently, she rarely shared her relationship with her parents, mainly confiding in her friends. As a result, her parents could not fully grasp the danger. Fabiana's close friends described her relationship with David as unhealthy. She quickly became disillusioned with him. He was obsessive, extremely jealous, and often provoked conflicts, sometimes just because a boy on the street said hello to her. The situation was difficult to control, especially since she was still in school. Relatives heard about the breakup but did not realize he was acting like a stalker, and that the two had resumed seeing each other. Tensions escalated. During the breakup, Fabiana complained to friends about him and wanted to report him to the police, hoping that would stop him from haunting her further. His behavior was frightening. For reasons unclear, his parents did not seem concerned about their son's condition. Many witnesses described Davide as aggressive, antisocial, and strange. He struggled to make new friends and showed signs of cruelty, which his family appeared to dismiss with a peculiar indifference. He had long been a troubled young man with possessive tendencies. An ex-girlfriend had warned others about him. She needed help from adults to scare him off, and only then did he leave her alone. Fabiana, however, wanted to handle the situation herself. Davide also had a difficult personal history and behavioral problems from an early age. These issues worsened amid domestic violence after his parents divorced. His first stepfather was an alcoholic who drank daily and often started fights, beating Davide and his mother. Although they separated from him quickly, the damage was done. Perhaps this contributed to Davide's cruelty. He could not let Fabiana go when she tried to free herself from his control. Based on this, detectives believed David was still hiding the full truth. The circumstances suggested he had lured her to the deserted area with the intention to kill. The gasoline canister strongly indicated premeditation. Davide did not typically carry extra fuel. He rarely rode his scooter outside the city, and its fuel efficiency meant a full tank was usually sufficient. Most disturbing was the brutality he inflicted on Fabiana, a fragile young woman. Her friends were convinced she would never have willingly followed her boyfriend to such an isolated place. She would have sensed immediately that something was wrong. Fabiana's funeral was held on May 28, 2013. At the town hall, where about 5,000 people gathered to pay their respects. Local TV channels and newspapers closely covered the event. The tragedy reignited public debate about femicide and the vulnerability of girls in relationships with manipulative partners. During the ceremony, Fabiana's family and friends spoke, as did the leader of her religious community. They offered support to the family and expressed hope that the perpetrator would be punished to the fullest extent of the law. Many people once again asked how to prevent the recurring violence that claims young lives. Meanwhile, Davide Moroni was arrested. He confessed and is awaiting trial in prison. Fabiana's relatives demanded he be tried as an adult, citing the crime's cruelty, planning, and attempts to conceal evidence. Although prosecutors advocated trying David as an adult, the judge ruled that he would be tried as a juvenile. His mental health became a point of contention. Witnesses, including his ex-girlfriend, described troubling behavior, prompting evaluations. However, experts found no condition that would justify legal limitations on responsibility. Declared mentally competent, Davide stood trial. Because he confessed, the proceedings were expedited. Fabiana's family attended every stage, determined to see justice served. He was found guilty and initially sentenced to 22 years in prison. Davide appealed, arguing procedural errors in the mental health evaluation and seeking a reduced sentence. An independent expert hired by the defense later concluded he was only partially competent. As a result, the appeals court reduced his sentence to 18 years and removed premeditation as an aggravating factor, allowing further appeals to proceed. There remained a risk his sentence could be reduced even more. Since Davide was a minor at the time of the crime, Fabiana's family could not join the criminal case as a civil party, but they continued to push for a harsher outcome, believing the sentence was too lenient. In 2015, the court ordered Davide's parents to pay €300,000 in compensation to Fabiana's family. The defense disputed this, but the family's lawyer argued that Davide's parents shared responsibility for his upbringing. The court agreed, finding that they failed to provide adequate supervision, including medical care and access to full education. The judge noted they did not monitor him sufficiently and missed the period when his mental health issues began. No records showed psychiatric consultations or appropriate treatment for David, a lack of care that the court concluded contributed to the tragedy. Maria Ludzi, Fabiana's father, expressed strong indignation towards the Ministry of Justice and even appealed directly to the president. His anger stemmed from the fact that Davide Moroni received concessions while in prison. Davide reportedly behaved well, avoided conflicts, and actively participated in a rehabilitation program. Because of this, he was periodically allowed temporary release. Fabiana's family condemned the decision as absurd, arguing that the laws protect perpetrators rather than victims. Mario wrote extensively about the pain of losing his daughter, saying that such leniency toward her killer only deepens their suffering. Fabiana's family has kept her memory alive. Since 2013, they have held a vigil every May 24 and organized awareness campaigns to share her story. Aligning these efforts with initiatives against gender-based violence, their work has drawn attention from organizations addressing similar issues at broader levels. In 2025, for the 12th anniversary of Fabiana's death, the Anti-Violence Center hosted the commemoration. The organization offers legal and psychological support to women in abusive or dangerous relationships. The events took place in a municipal suburban park in a square dedicated to Fabiana Ludzi, which has become a symbolic site. Despite these efforts, the family believes that the legislation remains excessively lenient. The story of Maria Paola Gaglione and Ciro Migliore is not only a tragedy of two young people, but also a mirror of a society still bound by prejudice and hatred. In Caivano, where violence is disguised as honor, their love is considered a disgrace and must be extinguished at all costs. That night, Maria and Ciro were walking down the dark road when an engine roared behind them. The person chasing her was no stranger, but her own brother. The pursuit ended in a tragic accident. Maria died, and Ciro, her lover, could only cry in despair next to her cold body. But justice was not on their side. The person who caused Maria's death was sentenced to only 9.5 years in prison. The whole world was shocked and wondered, why can loving someone cost you your life? Stay tuned till the end of the video to discover the full truth behind this tragedy. Maria Paola Gaglione was born in July 2002 in Caivano, a small Italian town known for high crime and strict traditions. She is the youngest child of Franco Gaglione and Pina Aimo. Her only brother, Michele Antonio Gaglione, is 12 years older than her and has always been protective of her and often treats her more like a daughter than a sister. The Gaglione family followed rigid traditional values. Men were expected to lead, women were taught to obey, daughters were raised to follow their parents' rules, while sons felt responsible for defending the family's honor, even by controlling their younger sister's choices. Growing up in that environment, Maria seemed as though she would follow the path that had been set for her. But things changed when she entered her teens. At 15, she met Ciro Migliore, 4 years older. Their friendship grew into love. Ciro wasn't like other boys in their neighborhood. He was born female and, at 15, began transitioning to live as the man he knew himself to be. For Maria, this was not a barrier. She loved Ciro and supported him completely, determined to stand by him through a difficult, brave journey. But while they found strength in each other, their surroundings were hostile. For her family, being with Ciro was seen not just as unconventional, but as a disgrace. Their disapproval weighed heavily on her. Under constant pressure, Ciro and Maria decide to keep their relationship a secret. For nearly 3 years, they hid their love from most people. Despite isolation, their bond deepened, sustained by affection, a desire for freedom, and the dream of living openly. When she turned 18, Maria mustered up the courage to face her family. She abandoned her parents' expectations, her studies, and her pre-established model. She chose to leave home and run away with Ciro. They stayed at the home of a relative of Ciro's, about 10 kilometers from Caivano. It wasn't far, but it gave them a fragile independence. They had no money, no home of their own, and no steady jobs. Still, for 23 days, they lived together, believing love would be enough. During this time, her parents received no news from her. Then, on the night between September 11 and 12, 2020, tragedy struck. Around 1:30 a.m., emergency services responded to a call about a road accident. At the scene, there were 2 motorcycles, a large one standing on its kickstand. The other was a small scooter, overturned on the roadside grass, with half of its body obscured by vegetation. A few meters away, Maria lay unconscious. She was just 18. The crash had thrown her from the scooter, and a violent impact against an irrigation pipe cut her throat, killing her instantly. Ciro had been driving the scooter. Despite his injuries, Ciro managed to get up and run to a nearby apartment building, frantically ringing the alarm, saying he had just been in an accident and had injured his hand. They assisted him and called emergency services. He was taken to a local medical center. At first, it looked like a simple accident. Initial reports said a young woman lost control of her scooter, possibly hit by another vehicle, and then ran away. But as investigators dug deeper, a darker reality emerged. It wasn't chance. It wasn't random. It was the end of a chase. The person pursuing them wasn't a stranger. It was her brother. Investigators reconstructed the events as Maria and Ciro were returning to the relative's home that night. Michel lay in wait. He knew their route and was determined to stop them. On his powerful motorcycle, he followed closely, then swerved in front of them. Repeatedly, he cut across their path, trying to force them to stop. At one point, he even kicked their scooter as they sped along the dimly lit road. Maria, seated behind Ciro, tried to calm Michel. She begged him to stop chasing them and to see that every reckless move put their lives at risk. But Michel's rage made him ignore everything. Consumed by anger and convinced he was defending his family's honor, Michel kept pursuing them. The chase lasted nearly 16 minutes. On a sharp curve, Michele delivered a final, violent kick from the left side. Ciro lost control. The car skidded to the edge of the road and then flipped into the bushes. He broke his arm in the fall but still managed to get up. Maria was not as lucky. Thrown from the scooter, she struck her head and throat against a concrete irrigation pipe. The impact was fatal. She died there on the roadside at just 18 years old. Chase followed. As Ciro tried to regain his footing, Michel caught up and attacked him, punching and kicking in a rage. Maria lay motionless, only a few meters away. Michel stopped only when he realized his younger sister showed no signs of life. In shock, he called his parents and emergency services, fearing for his safety. Ciro ran to a nearby apartment building, rang the intercom, and begged for help. Strangers let him in and called the authorities. He was taken to a clinic with a broken arm, but survived. Soon after, the truth emerged. Michele, 30 years old, married, and a father, was arrested. His first words to the police were chilling. He admitted he had done something stupid. He claimed he never meant to kill Maria, only to punish her for loving a transgender man. He asserted that Maria had always been normal, and he blamed Ciro for leading her astray. He also denied causing the crash, saying he was farther back when it happened. This story soon fell apart. Forensics found bruises and shoe marks on Ciro that matched Michel's motorcycle boots, confirming that Ciro had been attacked after the accident. Witnesses also came forward. Neighbors and acquaintances reported prior threats and violence. This isn't the first time Michel has tried to split Ciro and Maria up. The earliest recorded incident was on July 13 of the same year, when Michel went to Ciro's home and threatened to behead and kill him if he didn't stay away from Maria. Terrified, Ciro never reported the threat, but he never forgot it. Investigators continued to expand their investigation, and new reports suggested that some members of the Gaglione family were involved with local gangs, further complicating the case. Initially, Michel was held in pre-trial detention for personal injury and causing death in the course of another crime. As the evidence mounted, the charges were upgraded to manslaughter and domestic violence with homophobic aggravation. The judge confirmed the homicide charge and the assault on Ciro, which Michel admitted during questioning. Shortly after, Ciro spoke to the press from his hospital bed, in a wheelchair with his arm still fractured. His words were both heartbreaking and defiant. Despite losing Maria, he said that in a way they had already won, because they had lived their love freely, even if only for a short time. He recounted their memories and said that, although he tried to explain his love to her family never accepted it. To her family, he and Maria were just two women, and their relationship was forbidden. He recalled hearing some relatives say they would rather see their daughter dead than in love with someone like him. For Ciro, Michel was the most vehemently opposed, refusing to understand or accept. Meanwhile, Maria's parents stayed silent. They avoided speaking to the media, relying instead on their parish priest and lawyers. From the beginning, they insisted it was an accident. In their view, their son, Michele, was only trying to bring Maria home, not kill her. Maria's family published an open letter explaining their choice to remain silent, saying it was their way of mourning her with dignity and love. They insist their objection is not because Ciro is transgender, but because they believe he is untrustworthy. They portrayed Ciro as a negative influence, a young man often in trouble, without steady work, living by his wits. Still, even while defending Michele, they conceded that only time would reveal whether their fears had been justified. In sharp contrast, Ciro's mother spoke out publicly. Overcome with anger and grief, she asserted that Michele knew exactly what he was doing and was driven by his refusal to accept that his younger sister loved a transgender man. She accused the Gaglione family of setting a trap, claiming they pretended to seek peace only to lure Ciro back into danger. On September 15, 2020, just days after the crash, the town of Caivano gathered to bid farewell to Maria. The church filled with applause as white balloons rose into the sky and doves were released in her memory. Through their lawyer, the Gaglione family invited the entire LGBTQ community to attend the funeral. Yet, despite this public gesture, they did not allow Ciro, Maria's chosen partner, to say goodbye to the woman he loved. That same day, still in the hospital, Ciro turned to social media. He shared a message full of grief and love, noting it would have been their 3rd anniversary. His words expressed the pain of loss and the pride of a love that, to him, had triumphed against the odds. If only briefly, the story of Maria and Ciro resonated far beyond their families. Across Italy and beyond, people compared their tragedy to a modern-day Romeo and Juliet. Thousands, who had never met them, mourned openly, moved by a love that fought to exist and was brutally cut short. On social media, Maria's face became a symbol for many who had suffered in silence. Young people, parents, friends, and neighbors posted photos, drawings, and letters. Candles were lit, flowers placed at the crash site, rainbow flags raised high. The message was clear: love should never cost a life. But grief mingled with anger. Many rejected the family's attempt to downplay what happened, refusing to see it as a mere accident or a family dispute gone wrong. To them, it was an act fueled by hatred, intolerance, and a violent refusal to accept difference. The tragedy quickly became a national issue. Italy's parliament came under pressure to advance the long-delayed Zan law, aimed at addressing hate crimes and protecting the rights of transgender and homosexual individuals. As the public demanded justice, the courts proceeded. On the day of Maria's funeral, her brother Michele appeared before the investigating judge for more than 2 hours of questioning. He again claimed he never meant to hurt his younger sister, saying he only wanted a better life for her. His account, however, clashed with the evidence. Investigators had already drawn a different picture. The judge emphasized 3 key points. First, Michele admitted he had deliberately gone out that night to follow his younger sister. Second, he confessed he tried to stop the scooter by kicking it from the side, a claim backed by witnesses and security footage showing the 2 motorcycles dangerously close. Third, after the crash, he attacked Ciro with punches and kicks. Clear evidence, the judge concluded, of uncontrolled rage. The court determined this was not a simple accident. The fall of the scooter was not random. It was the direct result of Michele's reckless pursuit and violent actions. The judge stated that Michele's conduct showed not only aggression, but also a high degree of social danger, creating a strong risk that he could repeat similar acts. As a result, Michele's legal situation changed significantly. His detention was confirmed, and the charges were formally increased. He now faces manslaughter charges, aggravated by motives considered both futile and rooted in homophobia. What began as an apparent accident on a quiet September night is now recognized as something far more sinister, a story of prejudice, control, and rage that left a young woman dead, a young man traumatized, and a community demanding justice. On Thursday, September 17, just days after the crash, Michel broke his silence from prison. From his cell, he wrote a letter that quickly spread across Italian media. He said he felt as if part of his heart had been torn away. The loss of his younger sister, whom he had cared for almost like a daughter, especially given their father's absence during her upbringing. Michel claimed he never intended for any of it to happen and wrote that he could never forgive himself for that night. However, in the same letter, Michel changed her testimony, portraying Ciro in a negative light and describing him as associating with untrustworthy people and dangerous environments. In February 2021, public opinion about Ciro shifted dramatically during a large anti-banned substance operation across several Italian regions. Ciro was arrested along with 23 others. Authorities accused him of being a small-scale dealer within a banned substance trafficking network. The charges extended beyond banned substance to include weapons offenses, theft, arson, and aiding a detainee's escape from house arrest. Despite having already affirmed his male identity, Ciro was placed in a women's prison because the charges concerned events from 2018 before he had officially begun his gender transition, a decision that fueled debate in an already divided country. His defense argued these were past mistakes, made before his transformation and before his relationship with Maria gave his life new purpose. Meanwhile, the case against Michel continued. In April 2022, the court granted him house arrest with an electronic bracelet, citing good behavior in prison, no prior convictions, and a low risk of reoffending. At 32, he seemed to have secured a measure of leniency, but it did not last. On May 5, the trial began. Prosecutors sought a 22-year sentence, asserting that Michel acted deliberately, killing Maria and attempting to kill Ciro. The defense repeated that Michel never meant to cause harm and only wanted to stop his younger sister. Initially, prosecutors considered adding homophobia as an aggravating factor. As the trial progressed, that element was dropped. Ciro's imprisonment on banned substance-related charges appeared to support the Gaglioni family's claim that their opposition to the relationship stemmed from concerns about his lifestyle rather than prejudice against his gender identity. Ultimately, the judges treated Michel's lack of a criminal record and his behavior in custody as mitigating factors. They downgraded the charges, rejecting voluntary homicide. Michel was convicted of manslaughter and aggravated assault and sentenced to 9 years and 6 months in prison. The verdict drew mixed reactions. To supporters of Ciro and Maria, the verdict felt like a betrayal, diminishing the true nature of the crime. Outside the courthouse, Ciro's lawyer told reporters that the deepest tragedy was not only Maria's death, but also the destruction of a love that had survived poverty, family rejection, and social stigma. Michel's defense appealed, but in June 2024, the appeal was rejected. The sentence was confirmed, leaving no doubt about his legal fate. Still, the trial did not bring closure. It reopened wounds and ignited nationwide debate. For many, the case of Maria and Ciro exposed lingering social tensions, the weight of prejudice, the damage caused by intolerance, and the peril of replacing dialogue with violence. Beyond the legal rulings, the headlines, and the competing narratives, one truth remained: a young woman lost her life, and with her, a love that fought against everything but could not withstand the brutality of hatred. On a quiet summer night in Charlotte, North Carolina, a young woman boarded the last train home after finishing her evening shift at a pizza shop. The security camera captured her calm, ordinary movements, checking the route, finding a seat, scrolling through her phone. Minutes later, the same footage would become evidence in one of the most shocking, random killings the city had ever seen. Her name was Iraina Zerutska, a 23-year-old refugee from Kyiv who had survived war, displacement, and the uncertainty of starting over in a foreign land, only to lose her life on a routine train ride. Iraina Zerutska was born on May 22, 2002, in Kyiv, Ukraine, to Anna Zerutska and Stanislav Zerutski. She grew up with an older sister, Valeria, and a younger brother, Bohdan. The Zerutski household valued education, honesty, and respect for hard work. Her parents instilled in their children a sense of order and discipline. Schoolwork always came before leisure. Chores were shared, and effort was always rewarded. In high school, Iraina discovered her passion for art. She enrolled in a vocational college where she studied painting, restoration, techniques for documenting cultural heritage. At the same time, she repaired clothes, made handmade bags to earn her own money. Her family supported her every step of the way. Her father helped her find an internship with a restorer. Her mother offered constant advice. Her siblings photographed her artwork for her portfolio. Education, financial transparency, and online safety were family priorities. Those years in Kyiv shaped Iraina's character: diligent, persistent, detail-oriented, and able to combine creativity with practicality, traits that would later define her life. Dreams. But everything changed in February 2022. When Russia's full-scale invasion began, Kyiv came under heavy fire. Air raid sirens became the soundtrack of daily life. For a time, the family tried to keep some sense of normalcy, cooking, fetching supplies, helping neighbors, but soon, reality consumed them. Stanislav stayed behind to reinforce their apartment, while Anna and the children took shelter in cold, damp basements whenever the alarms sounded. Power outages, lost phone signals, fragments of grim news became their new routine. As missiles struck residential areas and stories of neighbors' deaths spread, the danger was impossible to ignore. Faced with that terrifying reality, the family made an agonizing decision to leave Ukraine. It meant abandoning their home, but survival, especially for the children, had to come first. Anna took charge of finding a safe route. She contacted relatives abroad, researched visa and asylum procedures, and compared options: Poland, Germany, or the Czech Republic. In the end, they chose the United States, where friends had offered to help them resettle. The departure was meticulously planned. Iraina packed her art projects, sketchbooks, a few sculpting tools she couldn't part with. Valeria gathered the family's documents and medical records, while Bohdan was allowed to bring a few books and his favorite toys. Stanislav, who decided to remain in Ukraine to protect their home, helped organize everything from afar. Watching his family leave without him was devastating, but he believed it was his duty to stay. Crossing the border marked the beginning of a new life. The family completed the necessary paperwork, underwent interviews, and started the long process of securing refugee status. By summer 2022, Iraina and her family arrived in Charlotte, North Carolina. There, they received temporary housing and support from local organizations while awaiting the outcome of their asylum application. Life in America was full of challenges: language barriers, financial struggles, the difficulty of adapting to a new culture. Yet, Iraina saw it as a new beginning. She believed that only through hard work and determination Could she rebuild her life and find her place in this new world? The Zerutska family stayed close. After arriving in America, Anna focused on keeping the household stable and helping her children adjust to their new environment. Valeria supported her mother, while Iraina took the lead in adapting as quickly as possible, enrolling in English classes, searching for part-time work. Bohdan started school and slowly began picking up the language. Stanislav remained in Ukraine, keeping in touch through video calls, holding on to the hope that one day they would all be reunited. Life in Charlotte, North Carolina, greeted the Zerutska family with a dose of harsh reality, endless paperwork, strict procedures, the immediate pressure to earn an income. The first months were consumed by legal formalities and the struggle to stay afloat. Iraina chose the most practical path, studying and working at the same time. She landed a part-time job at a local pizza shop, taking evening shifts so she could attend English classes during the day. Her public transport became her lifeline. She mapped out commutes carefully, timing transfers and train intervals. At the pizza shop, Iraina wore many hats. She took orders, assembled pizzas, packed deliveries, handled the register, kept the workspace spotless. She quickly mastered the point-of-sale system, learned food safety standards, followed storage procedures. Management noticed her precision and reliability. She never missed a shift, always arrived on time, often volunteered for extra hours to support the family. Beyond work, Iraina also volunteered at a local senior care facility. Her duties included escorting residents to meals, monitoring medication times, logging requests, and helping them video call relatives. Staff admired her calmness, clear communication. She fit naturally into group activities and helped residents feel comfortable. To improve her English, Iraina enrolled in classes at a community college. Her goals were focused: to speak confidently at work and to manage official documents without assistance. She kept a detailed vocabulary journal, recording practical words from everyday life, banking, insurance, traffic rules, appliance instructions. She also practiced pronunciation so phone orders at the shop wouldn't cause misunderstandings. The family operated under a strict financial plan. Iraina tracked every expense: rent, transportation, food, phone bills, tuition. She saved a portion of each paycheck, determined to earn her driver's license and fund additional training. Valeria helped translate documents, assist with errands, while Anna managed legal paperwork and appointments. Their 2-year roadmap was clear. First, reach college-level English proficiency. Next, obtain a driver's license and buy a small used car for late-night shifts. Finally, expand Iraina's skills through industrial sewing and animal care courses at a local center. Iraina also dreamed of interning at a cultural institution in Charlotte if a position became available, something that could reconnect her with her artistic roots. Life in Charlotte settled into a rhythm: classes during the day, work in the evenings, volunteer hours on weekends. Iraina carried the structure and discipline from her old life in Kyiv into every task she undertook. She logged her progress, reviewed goals each month, and constantly refined her schedule. It gave her a sense of control, a reminder that even far from home, she was still building something meaningful. On the evening of August 22, 2025, Iraina Zerutska clocked in for her usual shift at the pizza shop. Her schedule was set to end by 10:00 p.m., just in time to catch her train home. Once the shift ended, she followed every closing procedure precisely, cleaned her area, packed the boxes, finalized the inventory log, and signed out of the system. Everything was done by the book. As always, around 9:50 p.m., the shift manager gave her the all-clear to leave. Iraina logged out, changed out of her work uniform, and gathered her belongings. Before stepping out, she checked the transit schedule one last time. The next Blue Line train would get her home right on time. The walk to the station was short and familiar. She followed the main road, bright with streetlights and regular traffic signals. Passing a few crosswalks, she soon reached the East-West Boulevard platform. The arrival board showed her train was just minutes away. Everything felt ordinary. A handful of passengers stood scattered along the platform, keeping to the yellow safety lines. Some hovered by the vending machines, others waited quietly near the boarding zones. Iraina took her place a few steps back from the edge, pulled out her transit pass, and got ready to board. Overhead announcements echoed through the speakers. Updates on arrivals, safety reminders, standard etiquette notice. The train rolled in right on schedule, brakes hissing as the doors slid open across the platform. Iraina waited for the last few people to exit, then stepped inside through the middle door, careful not to block anyone. She spotted an open aisle seat near the middle of the car and settled in. Her backpack rested neatly at her feet, phone in hand, headphones in place. The transit rules prohibited taking extra space, so she sat upright, keeping everything tidy and contained. The train started smoothly, the hum of motion steady beneath her. Stop announcements came clearly through the intercom. A few riders were spread out across the car. Some scrolled on their phones. Others stared into the windows. Plenty of seats remained open. Iraina's seat choice gave her a quick exit at her stop. She glanced at the route map above the door, tracing the stops, just to be sure. Her phone stayed on, notifications active, ready in case her family texted after she got off. Up to that point, everything ran exactly as planned. The shift had ended, her route was confirmed, and the train was on time. According to the internal surveillance footage, the scene appeared calm and uneventful. The ceiling camera captured a wide view, another by the door added coverage from a side angle. Iraina sat near the middle, facing forward. Moments later, a man entered and took the window seat one row behind her. Separated by a single seatback, there was no exchange, no glance, no word between them. For the first minute after departure, the carriage stayed quiet. Iraina remained still, focused ahead. The man beside the window also appeared motionless, his posture slightly turned toward the wall. No movement was visible in his section. Then, in the next minute, he adjusted. His shoulder rolled forward. He leaned subtly toward the aisle. One hand slipped into his hoodie pocket, paused for several seconds, then withdrew slightly as he glanced around. None of the other passengers seemed to notice. No one reacted. The carriage stayed hushed. At the start of the third minute, his movements changed again. He lifted himself slightly, reaching deeper into his pocket. In the frame, a folding object came into view. A metallic glint. His fingers wrapped around the handle. His thumb slid along the locking mechanism. Iraina remained unaware, her focus straight ahead, the space between them unchanged. Nothing in his demeanor gave away what was coming. In the fourth minute, the attack began. He stood abruptly, stepped sideways, and delivered 3 rapid strikes aimed at her neck. The footage shows the motions in quick succession, short, sharp, and without hesitation. There were no words, no warning. Iraina tried to stand, but stumbled, losing balance. Around here, passengers recoiled, stepping back in confusion and fear. One person darted toward the front of the car. The attacker turned toward the aisle, moving calmly toward the next section. The weapon disappeared below the camera's frame. Doorway footage showed chaos breaking out. Riders pressing themselves against the poles, 2 sliding to the far seats, 1 fleeing through the intercar passage. No one helped. During those critical moments, everyone was paralyzed by fear. Almost immediately, a passenger from the front rows signals toward the operator's cab. On the footage, he can be seen glancing back, gesturing with his hand, and then moving out of sight behind the partition. Shouts and exclamations are audible in the car. Iraina remains in her section. Two other riders appear nearby, looking around and trying to assess the situation. From the first active movement of the assailant to the train's full stop, roughly 2 minutes pass. During this time, the doors remain closed, and the train continues toward the next platform. All onboard systems, lighting, and announcements function normally. Cameras show that the attacker does not return to his seat or approach Iraina again. Instead, he keeps a straight path forward down the aisle. The first calls to emergency services come in almost immediately after the assault. One passenger from the same car reports a woman who has been injured with a knife, lying on the floor and unable to move. The dispatcher asks for details, the train's direction, line name, and nearest station. The caller doesn't know the exact car number, but describes landmarks inside and confirms the train is heading toward East-West Boulevard. That information is relayed instantly to a police patrol and a county medic team in Mecklenburg County. The call is classified as a trauma with bleeding, with a note about a possible armed suspect still on board. The dispatcher instructs the caller on basic first aid and warns them not to move the victim. A second call comes from a neighboring car. An eyewitness reports seeing the attacker walking down the aisle, apparently heading toward the exit at the next stop. His description of the man's appearance and direction helps police prepare to intercept him on the platform. A third call is logged from the platform itself. The caller says he can see a man stepping off the train who matches the description broadcast over the radio. The dispatcher warns him not to approach, only to keep eyes on the suspect's movements. Meanwhile, the dispatcher stayed on the line with a passenger still inside the train car where Iraina lay. Her breathing was labored, but she was still showing signs of life. Eyewitnesses tried to follow instructions. One person kept firm pressure on the wound, another monitored her breathing and reported any changes. In the background, the dispatcher could hear the conductor's announcements, the sound of braking, and the doors opening, cues that allowed emergency crews to synchronize their arrival down to the minute. As the train came to a stop, the dispatcher instructed witnesses to meet the medics at the door while maintaining pressure on the injury. He also warned them that police would be detaining the suspect on the platform simultaneously. All calls were logged and time-stamped, later becoming part of the evidence. The train arrived at East-West Boulevard Station. As soon as the doors opened, Charlotte police, already briefed with the suspect's description, moved into position at every exit to prevent escape. A man in dark clothing stepped off the train, matching the description exactly. This was De Carlos de Juan Brown Jr. He did not run. Instead, he walked calmly. Looking around, officers ordered him to stop and raise his hands. Brown complied without resistance. He was quickly handcuffed, and a knife bearing traces of blood was found during the search. After the arrest, he was escorted through a secure passage and handed over to a patrol unit. At that same moment, paramedics entered the train car. Passengers pointed to the young woman lying on the floor. She was unconscious, not breathing. She had sustained 3 knife wounds, 2 to the neck area and 1 to the chest. Witnesses explained they had tried to stop the bleeding by pressing clothing against the wounds, but their efforts had been unsuccessful. The medics immediately began resuscitation measures, applying an oxygen mask and using specialized dressings for several minutes. They tried to restore her heartbeat, but due to severe injury to the neck vessels and massive blood loss, they could not save Iraina. She was pronounced dead inside the train car. Following the official pronouncement, police cordoned off the train. The car where Iraina Zerutska had been was closed to passengers. As investigators began documenting every detail, forensic technicians photographed the area, collected the knife, and secured her belongings. Witnesses seated nearby were asked to stay for questioning. The atmosphere on the platform was heavy. Shock rippled through the crowd. Some passengers cried quietly. Others stood frozen, unable to grasp what had just unfolded. Officers reassured everyone that the threat was over, urging them to remain calm. Several witnesses later confirmed that the attack came without any warning, leaving the victim no time to react or defend herself. Because the arrest was carried out swiftly and without resistance, law enforcement could fully turn its attention to the investigation. Evidence was carefully gathered at the scene, witness statements were recorded, and precise timestamps were noted. By the time the area was cleared, the first stage of the tragedy had ended. The suspect was in custody, and the incident had formally become a homicide case. Following the medical examiner's confirmation, Iraina's body was transported for a full forensic autopsy. Experts verified the police findings. She had suffered 3 stab wounds, 2 of them to the neck, leading to catastrophic blood loss. 1 strike had severed a major artery, making survival impossible even with immediate medical care. Arranging a funeral in the United States proved to be an exhausting ordeal for the Zerutska family. Her mother and sister, who had already been living in America, shouldered the burden of paperwork and coordination with authorities. Her father, still in Ukraine, could not attend in person. He joined the preparations remotely through video calls. The distance made the pain even harder to bear. He could not say goodbye to his daughter in person, a loss that deepened the family's grief. The funeral took place in Charlotte, North Carolina. Friends and colleagues remembered Iraina as gentle, hardworking, full of warmth. At the pizza shop, where she worked part-time, her co-workers spoke of her generosity. She often stayed late, helped others, and never complained. Staff at the senior care facility recalled her patience and empathy toward residents. The service ended with prayers and a moment of silence. Members of the local Ukrainian community stepped forward to help cover burial expenses, turning grief into an act of collective compassion. Iraina's story became a painful reminder of how migration and tragedy can intertwine. At the time of his arrest, Brown already had a long history with both law enforcement and mental health institutions. Little is known about his early childhood, but records show he grew up in North Carolina and began encountering the legal system in his teenage years. Court documents indicate that his criminal record started in 2007, when he was still a juvenile. Over the following 7 years, Brown was charged with theft, burglary, armed robbery, and making violent threats. Some cases were dismissed, but his behavior showed little improvement. He drifted between jobs, struggled with stability, and repeatedly returned to crime. In 2014, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison for armed robbery. His release in 2020 did not end his troubles. Within months, he appeared again in police reports. In early 2021, Brown was arrested for assaulting his sister and causing injury, followed by charges of property damage and unlawful entry into a restricted area. The following year, in July 2022, he was detained again for disorderly conduct. None of these encounters changed his behavior. By January 2023, his actions had taken a bizarre turn. Brown began making repeated emergency calls from a medical facility, claiming that an artificial material inside his body was controlling his movements. Authorities deemed the issue psychiatric rather than criminal and advised him to seek medical care. After multiple calls, he was briefly detained for misuse of the emergency line but released without bond on his own recognizance. Family medical records revealed a diagnosis of schizophrenia, first made in 2014. Brown's mother had repeatedly sought his involuntary hospitalization after a series of violent outbursts at home. Those stays typically lasted around 2 weeks, followed by brief supervision that quickly ended. In later years, he continued to suffer from delusions involving mind control and external manipulation. Because he never participated in consistent outpatient treatment, relapses became inevitable. Between 2014 and 2025, Brown failed to form stable social ties. His mother and sister eventually cut off all contact for their own safety. Cohabitation? Impossible. Records suggest he spent long periods without permanent housing, alternating between shelters and short-term stays. Financial independence eluded him. He never maintained steady employment. At the beginning of 2025, during a court hearing for one of his minor offenses, a judge once again released him on his own recognizance. Despite his homelessness and history of repeat crimes, the oversight imposed was minimal. He only needed to appear in court and follow basic restrictions. Without structured supervision, he slipped through every gap the system allowed. Federal prosecutors have now charged Brown with murder committed on public transit, a federal offense that permits the case to be tried at the national level and opens the door to the death penalty. Prosecutors have stated their intention to pursue the maximum sentence allowed by law. The state has also filed its own first-degree murder charge, but federal jurisdiction gives the U.S. Department of Justice direct authority to petition for capital punishment. The investigation determined that Brown and Iraina had never met. Case records confirmed the attack was completely random. Iraina had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. There was no evidence of robbery, argument, or any motive suggesting personal gain. Considering Brown's long-documented psychiatric history, investigators believe his actions were likely driven by delusional thinking, noted in prior medical reports. Despite that, the prosecution has classified the incident as intentional homicide, postponing any discussion of Brown's mental state until after a full forensic psychiatric evaluation. For Iraina's family and for the public, the lack of a clear motive only deepened the tragedy. The attack appeared to be a pure act of senseless violence. Under federal law, there are only two possible sentences for this charge: life imprisonment or the death penalty. The United States Department of Justice must assess several aggravating factors before seeking capital punishment: the brutality of the act, Brown's history of violent offenses, the randomness of the killing, the victim's death, and the fact that it occurred in a public space. In this case, every one of those elements applies. The defense is expected to argue that Brown suffers from a severe mental disorder, potentially undermining his ability to fully comprehend his actions. Yet prosecutors have already made their stance clear. They intend to pursue the death penalty. This decision positions the case as a potential legal landmark, raising difficult questions about mental illness, justice, and public safety. The murder of Iraina Zerutska sparked a nationwide debate about public safety and the state of mental health care in the U.S. Officials in Charlotte faced mounting criticism as the public questioned how a man with a history of violent offenses had been released on bail. City Council member Edwin Peacock, 3, said the tragedy shattered public trust, urging both Charlotte Area Transit System and Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department to overhaul security procedures on the Lynx Blue Line. Local leaders, including Mayor V. Lyles, condemned the killing as senseless and heartbreaking, while lawmakers called for stronger safety measures across the city's transit system. In response, Charlotte Area Transit System increased patrols, added ticket checks, and expanded contracts with private security firms. Nationally, the case quickly became political. Conservative commentators accused mainstream media of ignoring the story, and figures like Elon Musk and Donald Trump blamed soft on crime policies for the tragedy. Trump called Iraina Zerutska's killer a deranged monster, criticizing local judges and bail reform. His remarks fueled renewed debate over justice reform and the death penalty in North Carolina. The state legislature soon introduced House Bill 307, known as the Iraina Law, tightening bail restrictions, mandating GPS monitoring for violent offenders, and reinstating harsher penalties for crimes on public transit. The bill passed with bipartisan support and was signed into law in early October 2025. Zerutska's death resonated far beyond North Carolina. Vigils were held in Charlotte and abroad, with Ukrainian officials expressing condolences and President Volodymyr Zelensky honoring her at the United Nations. Artists and activists across the country turned her name into a symbol of loss, injustice, and the urgent call for reform. It was announced that the Rule 24 trial to determine whether Brown would face the death penalty had been postponed until April 2026. On October 22, Brown was indicted by a federal grand jury on charges of violence against a railroad company and a public transportation system. A breakup started like many others, filled with arguments, cold silences, and attempts to move on. But the woman in this story couldn't let go. Her love transformed into hatred. Obsession consumed her. For the next 10 years, she relentlessly tried to ruin the life of the man she once lived with. Their failed relationship quickly devolved into a cycle of deceit, manipulation, and increasing violence. To understand how far she was willing to go, we need to go back to where it all started. Rob Parks was born in 1980 in a quiet suburb of Great Britain. He grew up as the middle child among 3 brothers. A good student, Rob focused on building a successful career. At 14, he moved north to study psychology and criminology at university. Though bright, he lacked self-confidence, was painfully shy around girls. That changed when he joined the University Drama Society. Within a year, he became its president. Acting helped transform him. His confidence grew. He began to open up socially. In 1990, Victoria Breeden joined the same drama society as an 18-year-old freshman. As the society's leader, Rob often interacted with her. He was instantly drawn to her. They began dating, and within 2 weeks, Victoria was practically living in Rob's dorm room. Her behavior soon struck other students as unusual. She insisted on spending every moment with Rob, even when it disrupted his studies. Deeply in love, Rob didn't see the red flags. Having little experience with women, he assumed this kind of intense closeness was normal. Still, even he couldn't ignore how obsessively attached Victoria had become. By then, Rob was 20 and Victoria 19. She gradually isolated him from everyone else, especially other women. Rob started to sense that something wasn't right. That summer, after finishing his exams, he insisted on breaking up, wanting to spend the holidays with his family without Victoria. Naturally, she resisted. She quickly found a way to manipulate him into resuming the relationship. Whenever Rob made plans to meet friends at a pub or go out, Victoria would call, claiming she felt unwell and might have endometriosis. She even underwent medical tests to prove it, though no diagnosis ever appeared in her records. Many of Rob's friends believed she was faking it to control him. Each time she complained about her health, Rob cancelled his plans and rushed to her side. After 3 years together, Rob had tried to end the relationship countless times, but never succeeded. Victoria was a skilled manipulator who always managed to reel him back in. They often broke up briefly. Rob even dated other women, but Victoria would always interfere, stalking and intimidating anyone new. One night in 2001, after yet another breakup, Rob met a new woman and invited her over. Just after they shut the door, someone began pounding on it furiously. It was Victoria. Even the neighbors recognized her by then. She claimed she had lost her keys and needed to stay the night. Rob, weary but kind-hearted, let her sleep in the spare room. The next morning, he woke up beside his new girlfriend to find Victoria lying on the floor next to them, staring at him. As soon as he opened his eyes, she started a fight. It was just one of many incidents showing how completely Victoria tried to dominate Rob's life. She refused to accept that he no longer wanted her. In May 2001, Rob graduated from university. Victoria continued stalking him, scaring off other women. Eventually, she wormed her way back into his life, and after both left the university town, they moved into a rented flat together. From that moment, life with Victoria became a waking nightmare. She spent nearly all day in bed, insisting she was seriously ill, a clear excuse to avoid working and keep Rob at her service. She isolated Rob from his friends and family. Everyone notices how badly she treats him. Victoria made him do almost everything for her, repaying him only with insults. Still, Rob believed she was truly sick and continued taking her to hospitals for tests. During one visit, a doctor quietly asked Rob whether his girlfriend really had any condition at all, noting that all her test results were normal. It was the same story at every hospital. After that conversations, Rob began to suspect that Victoria was faking her illness to manipulate him. But instead of facing the truth, he kept convincing himself she simply needed his care and understanding. Several more years passed. Victoria eventually completed her university degree, while Rob earned a master's in advertising. After graduating, they moved in with Rob's parents. It didn't take long for his family to notice that something was off. Victoria made little effort to communicate, instead creating invisible barriers that cut Rob and his parents off from each other. Her strange behavior was impossible to ignore. She spent most days lying in bed, while Rob acted as her full-time caretaker. Rod and Victoria lived there for several months before Rob tried, once again, to end the relationship. This time, Victoria went to extraordinary lengths to convince him they could fix things, but only if they lived on their own. Reluctantly, Rob agreed, and they soon moved into a place together in Milton Keynes. They married in April 2004, when Rob was 24 and Victoria 23. Their wedding was a small, quiet affair attended only by close family. But even at the ceremony, guests sensed something strange. There was no real joy between the bride and groom. After the wedding, they began their married life, living apart from his parents. From that moment, Victoria assumed total control over her husband's life. She criticized nearly everything he did. Her manipulation slowly eroded Rob's mental health. He began to suffer from insomnia, anxiety attacks, and long bouts of depression. Meanwhile, Victoria continued to complain about her supposed endometriosis, describing constant pain that, according to her, had plagued her for years. Eventually, she told Rob that a specialist had recommended an unusual solution. Having a baby, Rob wasn't keen on the idea, but Victoria knew how to persuade him. Before long, she became pregnant. In 2006, they welcomed a daughter. For the first time in 7 years, Rob had someone who truly gave his life meaning. He was working full-time at an advertising agency, proud of his achievements and focused on building a career. Everything seemed to be falling into place, except for Victoria. Her manipulative behavior only worsened. Whenever Rob was at work, she called constantly, claiming something was wrong with their child and demanding that he come home. Yet whenever he rushed back, he always found their daughter perfectly fine. By now, Victoria had completely isolated Rob from his friends and family. He kept his frustrations to himself, confiding to a few close acquaintances that he often felt trapped, that marrying Victoria had been the biggest mistake of his life. Shortly after their daughter's first birthday, Victoria announced she wanted another baby. She said it would be good for their daughter and might even strengthen their relationship. The conversation took place one day while they were driving. Without warning, Rob blurted out that he couldn't live like this anymore. After years of emotional torment, he told her he wanted a divorce and that he believed he could be a better father on his own. Victoria was stunned. She tried repeatedly to change his mind, but Rob stood firm. In April 2008, when their daughter was about 18 months old, he left the family home and contacted a divorce lawyer. After 4 years of marriage, it was finally over. Victoria remained in their house, while Rob rented a small flat, keeping his new address secret. For a time, he even stayed away from work, afraid Victoria might show up and try to win him back. Once free, Rob slowly rebuilt his life. He started dating again, made new friends, and reconnected with people from university. Victoria, meanwhile, didn't stay single for long. Barely a year after the divorce, she began dating a new man named Russell, who soon moved into the house she shared with Victoria and her daughter. She even forced the little girl to call him Daddy. Rob suspected that Victoria was doing it deliberately, just to hurt him. When their daughter was nearly 4 years old, Victoria called Rob in a panic. She claimed she was unwell and that their little girl had suddenly fallen seriously ill, needed to be rushed to the hospital. She insisted that the child was in critical condition. Terrified, Rob dropped everything and drove nearly 200 kilometers to get there. But when he arrived, he was stunned to find his daughter sleeping peacefully in a hospital bed. Doctors ran several tests and found absolutely nothing wrong with her. Victoria, however, continued to insist that her daughter was suffering from a variety of ailments: constipation, allergies, fever, you name it. Rob visited the hospital every day, increasingly confused. One afternoon, his daughter told him something that deeply unsettled him. Every night, her mother put a hot water bottle in her bed and closed all the windows. Even though it was the middle of summer, it suddenly clicked for Rob. Victoria might be faking or even inducing her daughter's illness. The thought horrified him. Months later, Victoria and Russell showed up at Rob's house, demanding that he return some of their daughter's clothes that had been left behind during a recent visit. Rob calmly told her that the clothes were in the wash and he'd drop them off later. That's when Victoria suddenly turned hostile. She began shouting insults, tried to push her way inside. When Rob blocked the doorway, she deliberately fell backward, screamed that he had attacked her. Russell had witnessed the entire exchange, and even he seemed confused. Victoria immediately called the police, but after officers arrived and listened to both sides, they concluded that Rob hadn't done anything wrong. He had merely stopped his ex-wife from forcing her way into his home. The police refused to take further action. Victoria was furious. And from that moment, Rob could tell she wasn't finished with him yet. A few months later, Victoria suddenly refused to let Rob see their daughter again, claiming that the child had become gravely ill once more. She even said she couldn't obtain one of the girl's prescribed medications. Suspicious. Rob checked the details and discovered that the drug in question wasn't suitable for children at all. That's when everything fell into place. He managed to review parts of his daughter's medical records, and there, among the doctor's notes, he saw a reference to possible Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a psychological disorder where a caregiver fabricates or induces illness in someone else, usually to gain attention or sympathy. Rob was shaken. He realized that his daughter wasn't sick. Victoria was making her sick. Over time, Rob noticed a disturbing pattern. Whenever his daughter stayed with him, she was perfectly healthy, but as soon as she went back to her mother, strange, unexplainable symptoms returned. Rob began to suspect that Victoria was deliberately harming their child just to manipulate him or force him to come running back. In early 2011, Victoria gave birth to another child, this time with her new partner, Russell. Around the same period, Rob met a woman named Jane through mutual friends, and later that year, the two married. But what should have been a peaceful new beginning quickly turned into something far darker. Soon after the wedding, Rob began receiving disturbing late-night phone calls from an unknown number. No one spoke on the other end, only the sound of heavy, deliberate breathing. At first, he dismissed it as a cruel prank. But as the calls grew more frequent and persistent, fear set in. Convinced that someone was watching him, Rob went to the police to report that he was being stalked. Detectives traced the anonymous calls and discovered they were all coming from burner phones, prepaid devices, and SIM cards purchased without registration. Several of the numbers were eventually linked to real individuals, but when investigators contacted them, the responses were baffling. Each of these people claimed they had been trying to buy illegal substances from a man named Rob Parks. Police immediately launched an investigation, but Rob had never been involved in criminal activity, let alone illegal substances. He was a clean-cut professional with no record and a deep aversion to anything illegal. When questioned, Rob was stunned. He denied everything and insisted that someone was trying to frame him. Detectives soon confirmed his story. There was no evidence connecting him to illegal substances, distribution of any kind. Still, the situation left him deeply shaken. Rob couldn't shake the feeling that only one person could be behind this: his ex-wife, Victoria Breeden. But without proof, there was little anyone could do. Then, just as abruptly as they had begun, the calls and messages stopped. Victoria, however, didn't stop meddling in Rob's life. She continued to make co-parenting nearly impossible, blocking his attempts to spend time with their daughter. When the girl turned 6, Rob planned a special trip to Disneyland, but Victoria flatly refused to give permission. Not long after, Victoria broke up with Russell and started dating a new man named Wayne Wood, a soldier in the British Army. She proudly announced she would follow him wherever he was stationed, even to Germany, where he was soon to be deployed. She intended to take both her children with her. Rob, fearing he would lose all contact with his daughter, fought back. The custody battle began. During this tense period, a shocking incident occurred. Wayne suddenly appeared at Rob's home, shouting accusations at him, claiming that Rob had abused his own daughter. Rob was horrified. The allegations were unimaginable. He immediately realized Victoria was behind this. She had told Wayne outrageous lies, manipulating him, just as she had done to everyone else in her life. Rob denied everything, and the confrontation eventually fizzled out, but the damage was done. Victoria's obsession with destroying him was escalating. Soon after, the harassment took on a new form. Rob began receiving anonymous messages from unknown numbers, calling him a child abuser and threatening violence. The messages were traced and documented. Again, Rob was certain it was Victoria, but police couldn't gather sufficient evidence to link them to her. Victoria then crossed an unthinkable line. In a calculated move to accuse Rob of child abuse, she coached their daughter to tell classmates that her father had hurt and molested her. When the story reached teachers, Child Protective Services launched an investigation, but during their first interview, the truth came out. The little girl had been coerced by her mother into lying. The case was quickly closed, and no charges were filed against Rob. Yet, unbelievably, Victoria faced no punishment for the false accusation. As the custody hearing approached, Rob could only hope it would finally end her campaign of harassment. Eventually, the court ruled in his favor. Victoria was forbidden from taking their daughter out of the country. Furious at the verdict, Victoria handed the child over to Rob and his wife Jane, then cut off nearly all contact with her. But rather than moving on, she began plotting something even darker. In October 2013, Rob received another chilling anonymous message, this time a death threat. The sender warned they would burn his house down. After years of psychological abuse, Rob had grown almost numb to the harassment. He chose not to report it. Then, on New Year's Eve 2013, police unexpectedly showed up at his home. They told Rob that an emergency call had been made, reporting a fire at his address. Everything seemed fine, and Rob explained his long history of stalking, harassment by his ex-wife. Officers took his statement seriously and promised to trace the source of the fake call, but before they could, the threats became real. At 5:30 a.m. the next morning, Rob was jolted awake by the deafening sound of the fire alarm. Looking out the window, he saw his Audi engulfed in flames. He immediately shouted for his wife and daughter to run out the back door. Seconds later, a massive explosion shook the entire house. As the fire crew rushed to the scene, Rob's phone buzzed again. Another message, once more accusing him of child abuse and promising death. Fortunately, the blaze was contained before it reached the house, but the family was left deeply traumatized. It took his daughter nearly 6 months to recover from the terror of that night. Naturally, police opened an investigation into the car fire and explosion. In 2014, Victoria moved to Germany with Wayne. Their daughter stayed in England with Rob and his new wife, Jane. For a while, Rob allowed himself to hope that distance would stop the harassment. He underestimated Victoria. Not long after, officers informed Rob that Victoria and Wayne had been stopped trying to smuggle firearms back into the UK from Germany. Months later, investigators concluded Wayne had been behind the false arson report. He was charged with making a false statement and with setting Rob's car alight. Victoria was summoned back to the UK for questioning, and police searched the house the pair had previously occupied, but came away without evidence tying her to the hoax call, so she initially avoided prosecution. Wayne, however, was convicted for the arson-related offenses and later sentenced to 7 years in prison. Shortly after his conviction, Victoria filed for divorce. By late 2018, it had been roughly 10 years since Rob and Victoria separated. Their daughter was 12. Rob was 38. He had tried hard to move on, but Victoria refused to let him. Then a man named Graham Wall messaged Rob, claiming to know Victoria, warning that she was dangerous. Rob didn't know Graham, assumed it was another trap. He ignored the message, and nearly a year passed. Then detectives contacted Rob again, saying a new threat had emerged. He agreed to meet them. To his surprise, they arrived with a local TV journalist and said his family would be featured in a documentary. Detectives told him they suspected his ex-wife had tried to hire someone to kill him. Graham turned out not to be some random stranger, but Victoria's newest boyfriend, a man she'd met on a dating site. They'd been together only a few weeks when she tearfully told him their daughter was living in appalling conditions and begged him to help rescue the child. Shockingly, she quickly urged Graham to kill Rob or find someone who would. Graham, appalled, suggested they contact Child Protective Services or pursue custody through the courts instead. Victoria dismissed him and called his objections a bad joke. Still uneasy, Graham planted a small recording device in the couple's flat. What he expected to capture, evidence of infidelity, turned out to be far worse. On tape, Victoria met with a man and discussed murdering her ex-husband. The recording captured detailed talk of setting Rob's car on fire to lure him outside and then bludgeoning him with a brick. On October 8, 2019, Graham took the recording to police. An attempted murder investigation was opened immediately. Victoria, far from panicking, presented herself at the police station the next day and claimed her personal belongings had been stolen, including the phone Graham had allegedly given to detectives. She tried to turn the story around, accusing Graham of framing her, even suggesting he had plotted the murder himself. A closer review of the audio, however, made the situation unmistakable. Victoria had been speaking with a man named Earl Gernon, an individual known to police for a criminal past and willing to arrange violent acts for money. The tape showed she had been shopping for a hitman. She repeatedly rehearsed lurid, fabricated allegations about Rob and described in cold detail how she wanted him caught, bound, led into the woods and killed. By the time police briefed Rob, Victoria was already under arrest on suspicion of conspiracy to murder. Earl was also brought to the station. He claimed their relationship had been casual and that he had not taken Victoria's requests seriously, even though, with his help, she had identified at least 3 potential killers. The trial began in early 2020, drawing the attention of many men whom Rob had never even met before. Each of them took the stand to testify that Victoria had approached them, trying to hire them as hitmen to kill her ex-husband. To justify her actions, she told them that Rob was a child abuser and claimed she only wanted to save her daughter from him. Investigators later discovered that Victoria had been searching for someone to carry out the murder as far back as 2014, offering different sums of money, up to 5,000 British pounds, to anyone willing to do it. Before the trial, Victoria was examined by several psychiatrists. Surprisingly, all of them agreed that she was completely sane and fully aware of her actions. Ultimately, she was found guilty on 3 counts of soliciting to commit murder. The court sentenced her to 9 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving roughly half her term. This means that Victoria Breeden could appear before the parole board for the first time by the end of 2025. In the aftermath, Rob spoke openly to journalists, expressing his frustration that Victoria would remain part of his life for years to come. He feared that once released, she might try to contact their daughter again. On the morning of August 8, 2024, deep in the Amazon rainforest, just a few miles from the town of Yurimaguas, a police truck slowly made its way down a muddy road toward a remote wooden compound, known locally as Centro dos Mundos. A sudden shout came from one of the cabins standing apart from the main structures. Seconds later, officers smashed the door open with the butt of a rifle. Inside, the dim cabin was a scene of chaos. Bowls overturned, glass shattered across the floor, and the remnants of a small fire still smoldering at the center of the room. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood and smoke. A nearly naked man, drenched head to toe in red stains, knelt motionless, staring straight ahead. His lips twitched, murmuring words no one could understand. Nearby lay the body of a woman. Her corpse bore multiple wounds, and signs of a violent struggle marked the room. Blood smeared the walls, the floor slick beneath the investigators' boots. This wasn't just a crime. There was a ritual involved. Outside, staff members and local residents gathered in small clusters, murmuring about the 2 foreign visitors who had been staying there for several weeks. Police photographed the scene, sealed the cabin, and ordered everyone back. The eerie stillness of the jungle stood in stark contrast to the horror inside. Later that day, investigators confirmed that the man was a Ukrainian national and the woman was Russian. They had come to Peru seeking spiritual healing. Centro dos Mundos was a sprawling wooden complex, roughly 40 minutes by car from Yurimaguas, hidden deep within the Loreto jungle. At first glance, it looked like a simple retreat. Several cabins, a communal dining area, a ceremonial hall, and an open fire circle. Officially, however, the center promoted itself as a spiritual sanctuary, offering soul cleansing through ancient Amazonian practices, primarily through the use of ayahuasca and other psychoactive plants. The center was founded by a local man named José Ordóñez Sanchez, who grew up in the nearby village of Teniente Cesar Lopez in the Alto Amazonas province. From a young age, Jose claimed he could heal animals, even his own mother. Through touch alone, he began participating in ayahuasca ceremonies at age 12 and later declared himself a shaman. His background in acting and directing, which many eyewitnesses mentioned, made his ceremonies particularly theatrical, filled with dramatic pauses, vivid gestures, and powerful emotional cues. The center's website described it as a place where the worlds of spirit and humanity meet, with ayahuasca unlocking inner transformation. Promotional materials promised freedom from trauma, restored energy, even recovery from addiction. Visitors were offered jungle lodging, daily ceremonies, private healing sessions with Maestro Jose, and full immersion in Amazonian life. For travelers from Europe, the United States, and Russia, the center seemed exotic, transformative, safe. But behind the spiritual facade was a disorderly system with no medical supervision and no official licensing. Former participants later reported that potent, hallucinogenic plants were freely distributed, often consumed without guidance or proper dosing. Red flags had surfaced long before the tragedy in August. Several former guests accused Jose of inappropriate physical contact during ceremonies and so-called special healing rituals. Local media reported allegations of predatory behavior and emotional manipulation, yet no authorities intervened. The center continued operating, with Jose insisting that everything was part of the cleansing process. Staff later revealed that many visitors remained under the influence of powerful psychoactive substances for weeks at a time. There was no medical intervention planned. Even after the tragic death of Russian tourists, the center wasn't immediately shut down. Instead, journalists were allowed inside, and the property was presented as calm, welcoming. This raised serious doubts about the objectivity of the investigation and prompted a troubling question: why are places like this allowed to operate without oversight? Centro dos Mundos is only one of dozens of such spiritual retreats that have appeared along Amazonian river routes in recent years. They all promise enlightenment and contact with spirits, but rarely have professionals on site who can help if a ceremony spirals out of control. If the events in Yurimaguas resulted in a death, it is unsettling to imagine how many similar centers may be hiding dangers behind a facade of healing and light. As investigators reconstructed the chain of events, the victim's identity was officially released for the first time. Ludmila Lazareno, 44, a Russian national. After completing her studies, she married young, later moved with her family to Thailand. It was there, away from the noise of modern cities, that her spiritual path truly began. She eventually opened her own healing studio, where she led meditation sessions and workshops focused on reconnecting the mind and body. Her approach blended Eastern philosophies with shamanic traditions. On social media, she often wrote about gratitude, inner light, and the importance of living gently. She often wrote about trusting the universe and believing in the power of love. Friends described her as compassionate and deeply intuitive. She was the devoted mother of 2 daughters, whom she called her greatest source of love, inspiration. Despite a busy schedule, she often reminded her followers that preserving inner kindness was the most important practice of all. To the thousands who followed her online, Ludmila appeared to embody harmony, balancing family, spirituality, and teaching. Over the years, her interest in shamanic rituals grew stronger. She spent 9 years studying meditation, participating in cleansing ceremonies, and guiding others through their own journeys toward emotional recovery. South America gradually became the center of her spiritual focus. She called the region the ancient heartbeat of the earth. In 2022, she traveled to Peru for the first time and met Jose Ordóñez, the founder of Centro dos Mundos. In a blog interview, she wrote that her first experience with Amazonian shamans changed something deep within her. The jungle, she said, felt alive, like a place where a person can finally hear themselves without the noise of civilization. From that moment on, Peru became sacred to her. Ludmila returned multiple times, staying for weeks on each trip. According to her husband, the rainforest made her feel restored, grounded, and spiritually connected. Her family remained in Thailand, despite their understandable worries, supported her path. Her public image remained bright. Warm smile, open heart, captions filled with positivity. Her final Instagram post appeared in March 2024, shortly before her last trip to Peru. Under a photo at the airport, she wrote, "This trip will change my life. I feel I'm meant to be there." Months later, her words would take on a haunting significance. Ludmila departed for her third journey into the Amazon, eager to continue learning from local shamans. After recounting Ludmila's story, investigators shifted their focus to the second person at the center of the tragedy, Ivan Kuzmin, whose actions on the day of the killing suggested a sudden psychological break. To understand what unfolded in August 2024, experts began examining his past. Ivan was born in Ukraine and dedicated much of his youth to sports, particularly martial arts. His pursuit of strength and discipline shaped his identity. Later, he moved to Russia, began teaching capoeira, a Brazilian martial art that combines acrobatics, dance, philosophy. His students remembered him as energetic and charismatic, though they also noted his volatility, an intensity that could shift from passion to aggression with little warning. Over time, Ivan's dedication to physical training shifted into a pursuit of spiritual exploration. He became increasingly drawn to meditation, energy-based practices, and breathwork. During this period, those close to him began noticing troubling changes. His struggle with addiction surfaced, and he started withdrawing from others for weeks at a time before reappearing with a completely different social circle. His sister later recalled that he spoke frequently about visions, divine messages, and a personal mission to cleanse people of negative energy. In June 2022, Ivan traveled to Peru for the first time to join a program at the Centro dos Mundos retreat. He enrolled as a participant in a spiritual cleansing course. At first, he followed the rules, attended the ceremonies, and behaved calmly. But before long, his behavior shifted. Witnesses said Ivan began demanding increasingly large doses of ayahuasca, insisting that he could see more than other participants. The staff eventually restricted his participation due to safety concerns. After several weeks, Ivan left the center without causing any disturbance. 2 years later, however, he returned, this time not as a humble participant, but as someone who saw himself as an experienced practitioner of Amazonian rituals. By then, his dependence on hallucinogens had become unmistakable. He was reportedly consuming ayahuasca and psilocybin mushrooms regularly, sometimes mixing them with other psychoactive plants. People who encountered him in the summer of 2024 described a man in constant emotional turmoil, fluctuating between euphoria and despair. Speaking obsessively about spiritual purity and a higher mission he believed he had been assigned. In the weeks leading up to the tragedy, Ivan began making increasingly intense comments about Ludmila Lazareno, calling her pure energy and the light meant to save him. He claimed they were spiritually bound from a past life and that he owed her a sacred karmic debt. Most dismissed this as mystical rambling, but Ivan believed it wholeheartedly. His sister later told reporters that Ivan was not a violent person, but someone who had lost his grip on reality. She described a lifelong struggle against inner chaos, a battle between faith and fear. She said he had experienced drastic mood swings and multiple episodes of emotional collapse long before setting foot in Peru. By August 2024, Ivan's mental state had deteriorated severely. Prolonged use of hallucinogens, combined with isolation and the absence of medical supervision, left him psychologically vulnerable. He interpreted hallucinations as divine messages. He believed he had become a messenger between worlds. At that point, he was no longer able to distinguish vision from reality. What began as a search for spiritual growth had transformed into a dangerous descent into delusion. To understand what happened that night, investigators had to examine the substances used in the rituals. The central one was ayahuasca, a traditional Amazonian brew made from the Banisteriopsis caapi vine and the leaves of Psychotria viridis. Indigenous shamans use it to enter altered states of consciousness, but medically, it is a potent hallucinogen capable of triggering severe psychological breaks. Addiction specialist explains that ayahuasca contains several psychoactive compounds, the strongest being dimethyltryptamine. It interacts with serotonin receptors in the brain, dramatically altering perception. A person may begin to see, hear, and feel things that have no connection to reality. You can start hearing smells or seeing time. Dimethyltryptamine alone wears off quickly, but when combined with the vine that inhibits liver enzymes, the hallucinogenic effects can last up to 6 hours. During that period, users can experience panic attacks, violent impulsivity, severe dissociation, memory gaps, and temporary personality disruption. For someone mentally stable, it can be destabilizing. For someone already psychologically fragile, it can be catastrophic. The risk increases exponentially when ayahuasca is taken alongside other psychoactive plants. At Centro dos Mundos, it was common for participants to also use psilocybin mushrooms and San Pedro cactus, which contains mescaline. All three substances overload the same neurotransmitter system, flooding the brain with serotonin. This can lead to a dangerous condition known as serotonin syndrome, characterized by seizures, respiratory difficulties, extreme agitation, and complete detachment from reality. The combination of these substances often leads to a collapse of consciousness. When a person loses their sense of identity under such conditions, it is common for intense religious or mystical delusions to appear, visions of spirits entering the body, voices whispering commands, or a sudden conviction of being possessed by dark forces. In a confined space with no medical supervision, these episodes can escalate into extreme aggression in a matter of minutes. Neurologists emphasizes that ayahuasca is not medicine, nor a safe path to self-discovery. It is a substance that tears down the brain's natural filters. For someone with latent psychological vulnerabilities, it can become the spark that unleashes irreversible psychosis. For Ivan Kuzmin, that ritual became exactly that, a breaking point. Already struggling with dependency, he kept increasing his doses, mixing ayahuasca with mushrooms and San Pedro cactus. The result was a complete mental overload. His hallucinations hardened into a battle he believed was unfolding between light and darkness inside his own mind. Experts agree that tragedies like this could be prevented with professional oversight, medical supervision, psychological screening, and strict dosage controls, but in informal healing centers, all boundaries disappear. What is marketed as a spiritual journey often becomes an unregulated experiment on the human mind. And for someone already standing at the edge, this mixture can push them past the point of no return. Ivan and Ludmila's paths first crossed in 2023 at the same Centro dos Mundos, where the tragedy would later unfold. She was there as a student, and he as a participant. They connected almost immediately. She sensed that he was struggling emotionally. While he saw her as a guide, Ludmila helped him recover from the emotional crashes that followed the ceremonies. Ivan convinced they had known each other in a past life. After they left the center, they stayed in contact online. In June 2024, both returned to Peru, arriving just one day apart, Ivan on the 21st and Ludmila on the 22nd. Staff members later said the two were inseparable, sharing rituals, meals, long meditations in the jungle. According to José Ordóñez, there was no visible conflict between them. They seemed genuinely content. In early August, they traveled to Laguna El Source, near the Tarapoto region, a place known among spiritual travelers as an energetic sanctuary. Witnesses recalled them as calm, joyful, laughing often, and taking photos together. When they returned to the center, they chose to stay in a private hut, saying they wanted space to deepen their spiritual work. But it was during this time that Ivan's behavior began to worry those around him. He asked for higher doses of ayahuasca and spoke increasingly about his mission to protect Ludmila from darkness. Others dismissed this as symbolic language commonly heard during ceremonies, but beneath the surface, tension was growing. In her journal, Ludmila noted that something in the atmosphere had shifted. Still, she continued the rituals, hoping the imbalance would pass. Just days later, the bond they believed was spiritual would spiral into a fatal delusion. August 8, 2024. The humid tropical night over Yurimaguas was heavy. Still, away from the main buildings of Centro dos Mundos, stood a small hut made of wooden planks and palm leaves. Inside were Ludmila Lazareno and Ivan Kuzmin. It would be the last night either of them spent together. According to investigators, the two decided to perform a private ceremony that evening inside the hut. Authorities later discovered remnants of ayahuasca, powdered psilocybin mushrooms, and traces of San Pedro cactus, the three most potent, natural psychedelics capable of inducing intense hallucinations. The combination is extremely dangerous, even for experienced practitioners. For Ivan, already psychologically unstable, it acted as a catalyst. At first, the atmosphere was calm. They sat across from each other just as they had during previous sessions. Ludmila, witnesses said, knew how to guide rituals. She played music, hummed chants, and used gentle breathwork. But soon, Ivan's behavior shifted. His breathing became irregular, his movements sharp and restless. He claimed he could sense another presence inside the hut, insisting that someone unseen had entered the room. Later, during questioning, Ivan claimed that at some point during the ceremony, Ludmila began to change. In his altered state, her face no longer looked human, and her eyes appeared completely black. He insisted he saw a dark spirit enter her body. According to investigators, that moment marked the onset of a severe psychotic break. Ivan reportedly leapt to his feet and started shouting about demons and purification. Ludmila tried desperately to calm him, but by then, Ivan seemed unable to understand her words. Investigators concluded that he grabbed a nearby object, possibly a metal cup or glass bottle, and struck her with it. Around this time, guests elsewhere on the property reported hearing loud screams coming from the hut. One visitor, staying about 300 yards away later, said he heard a woman shouting in English, "Help me." Another guest sent a message to a staff member saying he thinks something happened to the Russian woman. Staff members ran toward the hut, but the door was locked from the inside. They tried to force it open but couldn't. All they could hear were frantic thuds, crashes, and the unmistakable sounds of a violent struggle. Someone rushed to find the center's founder, José Ordóñez. By the time he arrived, the noises had stopped. José later told police he looked through a small window and saw a horrifying scene. Ivan, covered in blood, standing over Ludmila with a knife in his hand. He appeared to be mumbling and gesturing at things that weren't there, as if reacting to invisible entities. When police arrived shortly after the emergency call, they found the interior of the hut in shambles. Furniture overturned, objects scattered across the floor, streaks of blood on the walls. Ivan, half-dressed and visibly disoriented, stood in the center of the room. He didn't resist arrest, but seemed entirely detached from reality. At the moment, officers restrained him. He reportedly said only one sentence: "I took down a demon." Experts would later determine that he had experienced a full psychotic episode triggered by a combination of powerful hallucinogens. To everyone present, what unfolded felt sudden, chaotic, and surreal. Within hours, Centro dos Mundos was surrounded by police, and footage of the arrest had already made it onto Peruvian television. Cameras showed a dazed, blood-covered man being escorted out by officers. When a reporter asked who the victim was, one investigator responded quietly, "She came searching for light." She found death in eyewitness video taken at the scene. Ivan can be seen alternating between laughter and shouts of, "She was possessed. I was saving her soul." When officers finally broke through the hut door, Ivan was still standing in the middle of the room, unresponsive to commands. He suddenly screamed, then burst into laughter. As officers attempted to handcuff him, he lunged forward and tried to bite one of them. They were only able to restrain him with help from staff members and nearby residents. The footage aired soon after, showing a man who seemed completely unaware of his surroundings or actions. Inside, police recovered a knife, a metal pipe, remnants of ayahuasca, psilocybin mushrooms, San Pedro cactus. Medical examiners confirmed Ivan exhibited signs of acute psychosis, profound disorientation, delusional speech, and extreme agitation. They concluded he had been under the influence of powerful psychoactive substances during the attack. Jose Ordóñez told investigators that the center itself bore no responsibility, insisting, "We didn't give them anything. They took it on their own." His statement sparked outrage among locals. Crowds gathered outside the gates of Centro dos Mundos, demanding its closure. Many believed the tragedy had been inevitable. Too many rituals had been conducted without medical supervision or proper safety protocols. What was marketed as a place of healing had now become the site of one of the most disturbing cases in the region's recent history. After Ivan's arrest, local police in Yurimaguas transferred the case to the regional prosecutor's office in San Martin. The investigation moved quickly. The severity of the crime was undeniable. On August 12, 2024, just 5 days after the incident, the court held a preliminary hearing to determine custody conditions. Ivan was officially charged with committing a deliberate act of extreme violence, resulting in death. During the hearing, Ivan appeared confused and disoriented. He admitted causing Ludmila's death, but insisted he had been expelling a dark spirit from her. His defense argued he had suffered a hallucinogen-induced psychotic episode. After reviewing psychiatric evaluations, the judge ordered that Ivan remain in pre-trial detention for 9 months while awaiting the final verdict. Not long afterward, new and troubling details began to emerge. Reports revealed that Ivan had been receiving supplies, food, cigarettes, and other personal items from individuals associated with the center. This revelation ignited yet another wave of public outrage. Despite this, Jose Ordóñez continued to distance himself from any responsibility, insisting that the tragedy had nothing to do with the center's operations. But journalists soon uncovered testimonies from former participants accusing him of misconduct, manipulation, and negligence. Once those stories aired, local residents renewed their demands for Centro dos Mundos to be shut down entirely. Many began referring to it not as a place of healing, but as a place of death. Ludmila Lazarenko's body was cremated in the city of Tarapoto on August 14, 2024. The ceremony was attended by a close friend from Spain and representatives from the prosecutor's office. Her ashes were later transported to Moscow with assistance from the Russian diplomatic mission. the Lazarenko family demanded justice, filing an official request with Peruvian authorities. To them, the entire tragedy was incomprehensible. A woman who had devoted her life to guiding and healing others was gone, taken by someone she had tried to help. The story quickly spread across international media. Around the world, people began discussing the dangers of unregulated spiritual centers and the uncontrolled use of ayahuasca in Peru. This case became a stark warning, a tragic reminder of how thin the line can be between a quest for spiritual awakening and a plunge into perilous, unmonitored experimentation.